and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GBNews.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome. It's just coming up to 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. And for the next few hours, me and my panel... God, sorry. I'm exhausted. I've just come...
It's a bit windy out there, isn't it?
Oh, God.
Are you running against the wind?
I was running against the wind.
Yeah, that's the story of your life, really, isn't it?
I know, it's terrible. But me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me in the next hour, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton. In a few moments' time, we'll be going for the clash. We'll be going head-to-head in a clash of minds with former Labour MP Stephen Pound, and also political theorist and visiting fellow at the MCC Budapest, Ralph Scholhammer. Now, stay with us, but before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. The headlines just after 3 o'clock. Well, our top story today, people are being warned not to travel as a string of storm warnings blanket most of the UK. There are several weather warnings in place, including 2 amber wind alerts as Storm Isha sweeps in. Forecasters say there's a danger to life with warnings of falling trees, power cuts and possible flooding. Winds of up to 90 miles an hour are now expected. Earlier, our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, said conditions are expected to get much worse tonight.
The rain at the front of this storm is now arriving in Northern Ireland. Winds are picking up, but it's expected at 6 o'clock this evening, when that amber warning goes into place for the whole of the province, that those damaging winds will start to arrive. People have been told to stay away from coastal areas and side roads for fear of falling debris.
Now, if you're nervous about flying, watching on TV, you may want to look away. Here are some flights coming into London's Heathrow Airport. You can see there they're experiencing some rather shaky landings, with wind conditions creating some very frightening conditions for anyone on board those aircraft. Several flights were spotted looking unsteady as they descended into Britain's main airport. US troops have been injured in a rocket attack in western Iraq, which has been claimed by a group affiliated with Iran. An unspecified number of American troops are undergoing evacuation there from possible traumatic brain injuries. A group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq has claimed responsibility for the attack, which is the latest in a series of strikes against US targets in recent weeks. It marks another escalation amid heightened tensions in the region following the outbreak of the ongoing Israel-Gaza conflict. Back here in the UK, Labour says the government's Rwanda plan won't act as a deterrent to any migrants entering Britain illegally. Speaking to GB News presenter Camilla Tominey earlier, the Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock said tackling the crisis depends on international cooperation.
Way that shipping perhaps 1% of the number of people that come across the channel on small boats to Rwanda is ever going to act as a deterrent. You're dealing with people who are fleeing violence and persecution. By stopping wasting so much time on Rwanda, which is just a gimmick that is doomed to failure, let's plough much more resource and time and energy into doing some of the things that have worked, like the Albania deal. We fully support the Albania deal, and that has worked as a deterrent.
Well, in the last few hours, there has been an explosion at a major gas terminal in the Baltic Sea, that's near Russia, in what's suspected to be a drone strike from Ukraine. Firefighters are battling flames there at the site after reports from Ukrainian media suggest a special operation was carried out by security services. Ukraine's government, though, hasn't yet claimed responsibility for that possible drone strike. Novatek is Russia's largest natural gas producer, and it's now been forced to stop operations at that site. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy's defences are to be boosted with £405 million of funding. That's amid escalating global tensions. Missiles that have been used to defend ships in the Red Sea will be upgraded, making it the UK's most capable naval air defence system ever developed. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told GB News earlier that Britain is taking a lead.
We're investing £288 billion over the next decade to make sure that we do pump more money into our military, into our equipment, and that we can safely defend ourselves. And Britain's leading the way, as I said, in Ukraine, but actually also this week I announced an operation in Europe called Steadfast Defender, which is a NATO operation, which the United Kingdom's providing 40% of the ground troops and 50% of the overall personnel, even though there were 32 countries in total involved in this. So we really are leading from the front in the UK.
Tax cuts could be on the way this spring as the Chancellor looks to relieve pressures on families. Ahead of the budget in March, Jeremy Hunt says the path to tax relief is working as he pledged to stick to the government's economic plan. Economists predict the cuts could be worth around £10 billion. Tens of thousands of people have been taking to the streets across Germany in protests against a right-wing political party. Marchers can be seen carrying banners saying against hate and defend democracy. They've gathered in more than 100 cities and towns across Germany. It comes after reports revealed a secret meeting had taken place involving the popular Alternative for Germany party. It's alleged they had discussed a plan to deport people from so-called non-German backgrounds, which would include many German citizens. The party, known as AfD, is currently polling second in national surveys there. And finally, the skies above Berlin last night were lit up as a spectacular rare meteor was spotted. For those listening on radio, we're looking at pictures here of that dramatic display in the night sky. Researcher Michael A., who managed to capture that moment on camera, had told reporters he was just about to take his dog for a walk when his colleague told him to keep his eyes on the sky. According to Berlin's Planetary Research Institute, that is only the 8th time ever it's been possible to predict the exact time of a meteor sighting. That's the latest from the GB Newsroom for now. We'll be back in the next half hour or so. For more, we're on TV, digital radio and on your smart speaker. Now, though, let's get back to Nana.
Good afternoon, it's fast approaching 8 minutes after 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, before we get stuck into our debates over the next hour, let me introduce you to my clash as they're going head-to-head in a clash of minds. Joining me, former Labour MP Stephen Pound, and also political theorist and fellow at the MCC Budapest, Ralph Scholhammer. Right, so here's what's coming up today in the clash. Is Brexit safe in Labour's hands? As Sadiq Khan calls for freedom of movement for young people, is the party trying to reverse the changes made by the departure from the EU? Then, is the civil service out of control? The government has announced plans to crack down on activism in Whitehall. But will workshops and a new Minister for Common Sense solve the problem? Then, should Conservatives cut inheritance or income tax? Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is weighing up the pre-election giveaway, and I'll be asking which one do you think he should be cutting? Which one should the Tories prioritise? And is your money safe with Sir Keir Starmer? Although Labour say they have no plans for new taxes, will all their big spending pledges, can Keir Starmer be trusted with the Treasury? And of course, the BBC, are they in any position to counter disinformation? As the corporation finds itself guilty of violating its own editorial standards, should we take any lectures from them? That's coming up in the next hour. As ever, tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. Right, so it's just coming up to 9 minutes after 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. Welcome if you just tuned in. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has called for a freedom of movement agreement for young people to be able to move freely to and from the EU for the first time since Brexit, in order to lessen what he says is the economic cultural damage caused by the UK's decision to leave the Union. And all of this after the current Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, as time as shadow Brexit secretary, is once again under scrutiny as he tries to step up his efforts to become Prime Minister. So do you think Brexit is safe in the hands of Labour? So let's welcome again to my head-to-headers, former Labour MP Stephen Pound, and also Ralph Scholhammer, political theorist and fellow at the MCC Budapest. Stephen Pound, I'm going to start with you.
Yes, well, what Sadiq is actually saying was that we had things like the Erasmus programme in this country where people from universities in the rest of Europe could come to study in universities here. And I think it was a damn good idea. It was cross-cultural, you know, the idea that you got to know what it was like to study in a Dutch or a Hungarian or an Austrian university. What he actually said, he qualified his comments very, very, very quickly and said he is not seeking to reverse Brexit because, you know, we may be, you know, I may be a Remainer to my bootstraps, but I'm a Democrat. So what he's talking about is that the ability for, particularly for our young people, to get to know our European cousins. We're the same family, for heaven's sake, to get them to know them better, but not to try to reverse Brexit, because that would be anti-democratic and, frankly, impossible.
Do you think, Ralph, what do you reckon?
No, I agree with Steve in this case. I mean, the problem with Brexit, I think, is still that very often it was considered as the end as the end game, but actually it was just the beginning. Sometimes when I look back at the Brexit movement, and I'm a continental when I was observing it, what kind of struck me is it reminded me of imagine the American Revolution, like the founding fathers declare independence from Great Britain, and then they say, all right, that's it, nothing else to do. And this is how Brexit struck me a little bit, right? There was all this campaigning, you got Brexit done, but then it seems like it's like when the dog catches the car, right? So here we are, so what's the next step? And I think these are kind of all the aftershakes of that problem. So where should there be areas of cooperation, and where should it really be a clean divorce? I mean, the idea to have young people exchange, you know, be the university programs, other things, is a good thing. And just to give a little bit of a historical perspective, I mean, this has always happened, right? I mean, if you look at the British Enlightenment, there's always been a very, very close relationship with our philosophers on the continent. So I think that is per se a good idea. But is it supposed to be kind of a sneaky way to reverse Brexit? I think that would be a bad idea, but I also don't think that is the purpose.
I think Ralph makes a very good point. I mean, one of the things that struck me very, very strongly when we actually left the European Union back in June 2016 was Interpol and Europol. We actually had a trans-European police force which actually cracked down on drug smugglers and did some work against people smugglers and many of absolutely ghastly things. So we are still working with the other police forces on continental Europe. And I think that's an example whereby some people would say we should have absolutely nothing to do with any aspect of it. But things like food standards, veterinary standards, the transportation of animals, clean air, environmental protection. There's so many things we have to work with in Europe because we are not isolated from Europe.
But Brexit is all about free movement of people for a lot of people. And the fact that the notion that we are almost moving towards it in some form or another is quite disconcerting for many people.
I do agree, but I think this is a little bit a problem that many have how Brexit is currently conducted. Because as you just said, right, cooperation, nobody's against cooperation. But look at certain environmental regulations, for example. I mean, even the current supposedly conservative government under Rishi Sunak, right, they are moving in kind of much faster and more extreme ways when it comes to net zero than the Europeans are. For example, the outlawing or the potential outlawing of the internal combustion engine, right? There's a much longer period on continental Europe than there is in Britain, which is absurd. And let me just give you an example. I mean, we see this now with steelworks in Britain. We know that the potential price for abandoning your industries due to net zero policies can be very, very high. Europeans are increasingly realizing this. We see the results in Germany. So it's kind of odd you leave the European Union because supposedly it was holding holding you back, and then you enact policies that are worse than those by the European Union. So I think it defeats a little bit the purpose.
Well, no, I would agree with that. I don't think they're conducting Brexit very well at all. And in particular, the whole Tata Steel thing, which I think is absurd, to lose all your means of production and to...
I think the idea that we, an advanced industrial state, cannot make our own steel,
it's madness.
That is ludicrous. And when I look at a Royal Navy warship, and I think that steel was actually built was made in South Korea, it was smelted in there. The ships were built in also possibly Korea, possibly Holland. It's a ridiculous situation. But look, the point is the idea of going from sort of the Bessemer converter system to this arc processing that they're talking about in Port Talbot is a good idea in the medium to long term.
Yeah,
what you cannot do is to bring it in overnight, lose 6,000 jobs plus the whole supply chain, and condemn that whole swathe of South Wales yet again because they've lost the coal mines, they've lost the shipbuilding, they've lost so much. To lose this as well is actually condemns them to penury.
Well, the problem is as well, I was speaking to some scientists who literally couldn't agree with each other. But the problem with the whole... Well, yeah. But the problem with the arc processing mechanism is that you can make the virgin steel eventually, but they were saying you can do it with the use of hydrogen. Now, that's what they're saying. I don't know whether that's
true.
No,
that is true.
Sorry. That is in time. That is not ready now. We do not have the infrastructure to do that right now. So it seems absolute madness.
Well, the thing is, these debates, what is important to keep in mind, there are many things that are technologically possible, but the other question is, do they make economic sense? So if you say we can make green steel in Britain, that is absolutely possible. There are many things are possible. But of course, if Chinese steel is then 50, 60, 70% cheaper, if you're a car maker in Britain, you're going to have a problem because Chinese cars are already cheaper. If they then also can work with cheaper steel, right? At some point, the British customer, the idea the United States tried this with Japanese car exports in the 70s and 80s to say, well, American cars are more expensive, but it's like a patriotic duty to buy an American car. Well, some people can afford that, many people can't. So if you have the Chinese car that costs half as much as the British car, many British people will be forced to buy the cheaper Chinese car.
Well, that was one of Obama's mistakes when he did. I mean, in Europe, they have a thing called home market preference, which was actually outlawed under the EU. But if you remember, he tried to revive, Detroit and so the Rust Belt by doing that. But what's bizarre is, when I was in Donetsk a few years ago, I was amazed to see that one of the main towns there was actually used to be called Hughesgrad, because the steel processes there were actually operated by Welsh people, because Wales was such a leader in it, and because what they had in Donetsk, in that part of the world, they had the iron ore, they had the water, they had the labour, and so the Welsh went out and did it. So from actually running, actually showing the world how to do it, to actually standing back and saying we can't do it, and the only people who can operate our steel thing are the Tatars. I'm sorry, I'm not the greatest flag-waving patriot, but I do wish to God we could do something in this country.
Well, you think the thing with steel, though, is they put tariffs on it, didn't they, to make it more
and it didn't work,
expensive, and that didn't work.
And Obama regretted it.
Yeah, and we tried that here as well. But the bottom line is, when it comes to things like war, then you're in trouble because you need to rely on somebody else to give you those things. And we saw that with COVID.
Yeah. No,
absolutely. COVID, as soon as the EU thought, hang on a minute, you're getting all the vaccines, we're going to stop the vaccines. They stopped the vaccines that they had not ordered, that we had ordered, because they didn't have the ones that they'd ordered from someone else. So the problem is, as we saw with all the PPE and all the other things that came with it, it's a supply chain, and you'd think that this government would have learnt the lesson. And even if it is more expensive to keep a virgin steel industry in this country.
Well, it doesn't have to be more expensive. I mean, if you allow me to go all Charles Dickens on you, right? I cannot tell you a story of two cities, but I can tell you a story of two countries. I mean, if you compare the United States and Germany, we have two countries that tried two different revolutions. The Germans tried the Green Revolution, the Americans had the Shale Revolution. And we know now very well which revolution ultimately worked better. Like the United States are currently, as we speak, reindustrializing because their energy is so cheap. This could be done in a similar fashion in Great Britain, but for some reason, I don't know why, both Tories and Labour seem to look at the German example and say, this is how we have to do it. I mean, if you want to follow Berlin into the abyss, be my guest. I just don't think it's a very smart way to
get back
forward.
on the Tale of Two Cities. I mean, the first sentence of the Tale of Two Cities was, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And in many ways, it is the best of times because we have a sophisticated industry. It is also the worst of times. We don't actually have iron ore in this country. So if we're going to have a steel industry here, we're going to have to bring in the raw iron from somewhere, unless we're going to simply rely on recycling what we've got. So we're going to have those global links.
So how does this link with Brexit? Because that was...
Oh, we've moved on a bit.
I know, I'm teasing you.
No, but it's crucial because it's a comment. But the thing is, I believe, and I mean, I don't want to provoke your viewers. I think one of the things
go on.
that nobody wants to talk about is, you know, when Britain lost its empire, it also kind of lost its identity. And I think since the 1950s, 1960s, there was this search for identity. So one idea was, because Winston Churchill, I think, would never have joined the European Union. But once the empire was gone, the idea was, OK, let's try it with the European Union, European integration. Then that didn't really work out for kind of the British soul, if you want. Now they say, let's do Brexit. Maybe Brexit will be kind of the new British identity. Now we see that this is also not fully working out. And I think now this is a constant search of what does it mean to be British and what is Britain's role in the world.
That's a much wider. I think it was Dean Rusk in 1955 who said Britain's lost an empire, but it hasn't yet found a role.
And I think that's still correct.
I think that, you know, I think he was right then, but I think it was Dean Rusk, but I'm sure I'll be corrected if it wasn't.
But I reckon the final deconstruction of the empire will be the destruction of the steel industry, because ironically, the only reason we could travel all around the world and colonise all these places was
because we had ships.
Build ships.
Yeah.
So the fact that we've literally gone in a full circle and come back to zero.
Well, they were actually built of wood initially.
They were, yeah. They were. But
not in my day, I hate it.
But eventually we came up with our steel industry.
But this is the thing, because that's the nice thing about Brexit, right? Brexit allows Britain to move autonomous in many areas. So if I would be in charge in London, for example, I would say there are, for example, significant rare earth, iron ore deposits in Scandinavia, in parts of Eastern Europe. And I would go there and say, Britain still has a strong industrial base. It's underused, but the base is still there. To say, we built our own refining minerals industry in Britain, but we get the resources from our European partners. Make, you know, bilateral agreements with them. I think there's a lot that can be done. But the problem is, and this is, by the way, also the problem in continental Europe, that politicians seem to be very capable of spouting platitudes, but they're much worse than actually formulating policy. I'll give you one really quick example. I mean, I find it absurd. A couple of days ago, we have British politicians saying we can support Ukraine for another 100 years. Hey? In the war. But you can't if you don't have a defensive industry. The same with the Royal Navy. You cannot say we're going to bulk up the Royal Navy if you don't have a defensive industry, because if you don't have an industry, you also don't have a defensive industry. And I think there's a cognitive dissonance that you can say, oh, we abandon steel, we abandon gas, we abandon coal, we abandon nuclear, but at the same time, we become a new industrial powerhouse. This is not how these things work.
The key thing is, I mean, Kiruna in northern Sweden has massive iron ore deposits, and it used to have a huge iron industry. In fact, it's been run down very much indeed. But I mean, I've been doing some union stuff there years ago, and they said there's just no demand for it because the steel is cheaper to come in from China and other places. If we could actually get cheap iron ore from Sweden, or sorry, at least realistically priced iron ore, process it, smelt it and shape it here, then we've solved the problem.
Well, can I make my last point?
I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's exactly what you say is exactly the point. Yeah. The reason is the Swedes very much hold back like many in continental Europe because of EU regulations, but you're no longer part of the EU, so you can go there and can say you guys cannot process it because you're held back by the regulations that we don't have. Give us the iron ore, we process it, and then we re-export it.
But there's this obsession with the whole... A lot of people wanted us to stay within the EU, and I think there's a lacklustre approach.
Well, because London is more obsessed with regulation than Brussels. That's the dark secret that nobody wants to say.
It would seem to be the way. We've exchanged the red tape for green tape, which is our own problem. Yes, but what do you think? GBNews@gbnews.com. What was the question? Crikey, we've moved way off.
Is the sneaky Labour Party trying to slip us in back into Europe through the back door?
The answer is obviously yes.
Yeah, the answer is obviously. What do you think?
If only.
Yeah, they're trying to get us in through the back door. It's Sadiq Khan's little plan to create this sort of like EU thing where people can exchange, and actually what it is freedom of movement in the end. Is that at the beginning, or is that an acceptable move? What do you think? GBNews@gbnews.com, or tweet me at GBNews. Very briefly, I think I can sneak this one in, I'm not sure, but I'll do it. The Cabinet Office Minister has ordered a review of Whitehall's diversity networks and a refresh of the Civil Service's impartiality guidance to stop officials using their jobs as a vehicle for political activism. And under the plans discussed with Kemi Badenoch, the Equalities Minister, and Esther McVeigh, the Minister for Common Sense, diversity meetings would have to be held before work, during lunch breaks or in the evenings. That will stop them. So is the civil service out of control? Let me welcome again to my clashers, Stephen Pound and also Ralph Scholhammer. Who did I go to first? I'll go to Ralph. Civil service in this country, are they out of control?
I'm not sure if they're out of control, but I think what the question describes is there's a lot of talk these days about the so-called deep state and if it's kind of some kind of conspiracy, but I don't think that's the case. I think the problem is that a significant part, and again, that's a problem we have in continental Europe as well, is that so many members of the civil service have been marinated in a very specific worldview that it's actually very difficult for those on top, the actual government, to effect policy change. So I would at least by tendency, agree with the idea that somebody who's a civil servant, kind of the primary qualification is, of course, that they're qualified for the job they're doing. The second one, I think they need to have a very strong sense of loyalty to the country they're serving. And I think that should be it. I think you cannot have, for example, a government, as we just talked in a couple of seconds, that say we want to revive the steel industry, but half your civil servants are green activists. I mean, this would not work, I would assume.
There's things called the Widdicombe rules, and the Widdicombe rules, they apply not just to the civil service, they apply to local government, they apply to most things like the police force and the ambulance service, where you cannot be politically active, i.e. you cannot put a window bill up, you cannot campaign, you cannot stand for the council, you cannot stand for parliament, above a certain pay grade. And certainly when I was working in the council, there came a point where if you hit a certain point, you couldn't be politically active. Now, look, I don't want to have people working in the civil service who have no worldview at all, have no perspective or no desire to be active. What I do object to is this idea that everybody is so... They've got their arms up their back, they're trying desperately to be sort of wokerier than thou. And you have this ludicrous situation where it actually seems to me they spend more time A, staying at home, and B, coming up with these ridiculous, ludicrous little sessions where they sit around and talk about what sort of animal would you like to be. You know, as far as I'm concerned, there's a midway point, and I hate to sound moderate, but I think I would actually like to have people who are not woke activist civil servants. I'd like to have civil servants who are actually aware of things and have views and opinions, but you cannot get away from the Widdicombe laws. It's not Anne Widdicombe, by the way.
No,
this was Mr. Justice Widdicombe. Yeah, the laws, you cannot actually be a public servant and a political activist at the same time.
Because at the moment they're
having their cake and eat it, aren't they?
Well, they are a bit, and a lot of them are staying at home as well and actually working from home. Well, listen, give us your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.com. Do you think that the civil service has been captured, have they, by some woke ideology? gbviews@gbnews.com. Get in touch straight away. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. Coming up, with rumours swirling over Labour's tax plans, can you trust Sir Keir Starmer with your money? Up next, though, with big election giveaways on the cards, should the Tories cut inheritance tax or income tax?
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you.
every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Of the proms.
20 minutes after 3 o'clock, it's fast approaching. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's time for The Clash. And now, as rumours swirl of pre-election giveaways, can the Tories deliver anything to win back voters? Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is set to be handed a multi-billion-pound boost by official forecasters next week. That will pave the way for a package of pre-election tax cuts. But should the Conservatives cut inheritance tax or income tax? This is what they've been discussing. So let me welcome again to my head-to-headers former Labour MP Stephen Pound and also political theorist and fellow at the MCC Budapest, Ralph Scholhammer. Right, I'm going to start with you, Stephen Pound. Yeah. If they should cut either of these taxes, which one would you say?
I don't think they should do either. I think it's ridiculous.
No.
I think what they should be doing, if we've got £10 billion swirling around in the coffers, let's bulk up the police force, let's do something about the NHS, let's do something about the armed forces, and let's cut business rates and allow businesses to actually grow and flourish and employ people and get more tax in. The idea of actually giving it to individual people who may put it under the bed for all we know is downright silly. As for inheritance tax, it affects 3% of the population, and the people who receive it, they've not paid tax on it. So you simply wake up one morning and you've got a massive great chunk of money.
You might not have paid tax on it, but the person who's died has paid tax on it.
Well, they're dead.
Yeah, but that's not the point. I completely object to that. You're dead. You've done all the stuff to save for your kids, and now you have to give it away to the Treasury.
First of all, there's a level at which you have to pay. And most houses, except in the southeast and in London, most people won't be affected by any case.
Well, we say that now, but you know how they keep the levels; they don't change.
Well, it's quite interesting
into it, aren't they?
The Tories haven't actually uprated that.
Well, exactly.
Which you think they might do if they really wanted it. But the reality is, I think it would actually perpetuate and bake in divisions within society if somebody wakes up one morning and they are a multi-millionaire through no work that they well, not a certainly a half-millionaire through no effort of their own, just because they happen to have a rich granddad who died.
Well, that's got nothing to do with it. The rich granddad who's died has paid tax, Ralph.
Yeah, I feel like we have the body swap here, that the British politician sounds like Karl Marx and the guy with the German accent sounds like Adam Smith. No,
He was Scottish.
Yeah, well, I think in imperial terms, right, in British terms. But I get the point, but I'm always worried, and we saw this also before with the idea of a ministry of common sense. First of all, I don't think it's really necessarily the obligation of the government to make a fair society. Right. I think the obligation of the government is to create conditions where everybody can live according to their best talents, according to, to find their their role of self-fulfillment or whatever they see their life to be leading. Because historically, every time when governments try to make a quote-unquote equal and fair society, we know where this led, right? We are too different as people. And the other thing, what you're saying is very dangerous, because you basically argue that the grandson and the grandfather have no connection whatsoever. It's like two completely different people that randomly happen to be related, which might be true. But isn't it the prerogative of the grandfather to decide who should have access to whatever he built up during his life? I mean, these are family ties and family bonds.
And the grandfather can do that where the grandfather is still alive. There's no reason why the grandfather can't do that. He can't offset, he can't make a gift. Don't forget that, and you know and I know that most of the people who've got this amount of money are pretty sophisticated when it comes to tax avoidance. And so the reality is it's going to affect a tiny number of people. As I said, 97% of the population will not be affected by it. Therefore, if there's any money swirling around, let's give it to the police, let's give it to the armed forces, let's give it to the NHS.
Yeah, but that's such an un-British argument, right? I would argue that British liberalism would say that if something is unjust, it's unjust. The question is not if it affects 3% of the population or 97% of the population. The policy is still unjust, because by that logic, I can say I take, the 100 richest people in Britain and I just nationalise all their own, because, it's only 100 people, right?
You never get your hands on it because it's all in the Cayman Islands.
So, but would you do it if you could?
Yeah. No, of course I wouldn't, because
Are you sure?
People, I'm sorry, comrade. I'm sorry.
There we go.
People have to have aspiration. They have to have an opportunity for action.
I agree. Yes.
And if the value of your house went up and then you lost every penny of it, then that would be against aspiration. But I mean, I bought a house for about the price of a couple of packets of fags back in the 70s. And it's worth silly money now. So that's no hard work. I've not worked hard for that. It's just happened.
Yeah, but that just shows that the British government is incompetent when it comes to housing policy. But why would I want to give even more money to this government? The thing is, there's this illusion, I think, that we try to purport that if only the government would have slightly more money, then everything would get better. I promise you, let's double the inheritance tax. Yeah. The problems Britain has would not go away. We have a competency problem in government again in Europe and in the UK, and money is not the solution.
No, we waste billions. I mean, we build upgrading HMS Westminster and then putting her in dry dock. The defence procurement policies are wasting billions. There's no question about that. But what I'm saying is that if we have got the money, I think most people, if you stopped them in the street, would say, look, we need law and order, we need education, we need health. Those are the things that affect everybody in the country. And I'm sorry, if that makes me a frothing Marxist, then I'll grow a beard and book a place in Highgate Cemetery.
Can you grow a beard?
Of course I can grow a beard. They normally say I have my head on upside down.
Well, this is again. I'm not disagreeing with that, but this is so weird. If you look at the amount of money the British government already gets in and is already spending, and we discuss here about the provision of law and order, which is kind of the core obligation of a government. Yeah. If we say that Britain in 2024 cannot provide law and order, again, it's not a money problem; it's a politics problem.
Well, I think he's got a point there. But listen, these organisations do have a lot of money. I think a lot of them actually are organised very well. I think that's the point here. So, what would you cut then? I've got to go to the news. So if you could cut any of these taxes, would you cut them, yes or no? And if so, which?
I would cut both of them.
You'd cut both. And you?
Neither of them.
Neither of them. Good.
There was a clash.
At last.
Outside.
A clash of minds going head to head. That's more like it. Right, we'll stay with us. Loads more to come here on GB News. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News Live on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, my monologue on the hypocrisy of Harry and Meghan's cellist after he said that he doesn't want to hear Rule Britannia, which is a bit much in the last night of the problems. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you very much and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's just after 3:30, the headlines. Well, as we've been hearing, people are being warned not to travel as a string of storm warnings blanket most of the UK. There are several weather warnings in place, including 2 amber wind alerts as Storm Aisha sweeps across the country. Forecasters say there's a danger to life with warnings of falling trees, power cuts and possible flooding. Winds of up to 90 miles an hour are now expected. Our South West England reporter Jeff Moody says conditions are expected to get worse tonight.
Well, the storm's really beginning to take effect now. The wind is really beginning to pick up. The rain has arrived too, and it's going to get a whole lot worse tonight. This is the 9th named storm of the season, and what makes this one unique is that it's going to affect the whole of the UK. The Met Office is saying make sure that everything in your garden is secured, fixed down. The risk from flying debris is very, very real indeed. Avoid coastal paths and avoid rural paths too. The best thing you can do is to stay indoors.
US troops have been injured in a rocket attack in western Iraq, which has been claimed by a group affiliated with Iran. A number of people are being treated for possible traumatic brain injuries from that strike. A group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq has claimed responsibility for the attack, which is the latest in a series of strikes against US targets in recent weeks. The Royal Navy's defences are to be boosted with a £405 million funding amid escalating global tensions. Missiles that have been used to defend ships in the Red Sea will be upgraded, making it the UK's most capable naval air defence system ever developed. And the skies above Berlin were lit up last night as a rare meteor was spotted. Researcher Michael A., who managed to capture the moment on camera, told reporters he was just about to take his dog for a walk when a colleague told him to keep his eyes on the sky. It's only the 8th time it's ever been possible to predict the exact timing of a meteor sighting. That's the latest from the GB newsroom for now. For more on those stories, visit our website, gbnews.com.
Stay tuned. Coming up, is your money safe, or is our money safe with Keir Starmer? As Labour claim they don't have plans for any new taxes, but they're all big claims to rebuild Britain. Do you trust them?
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Right, it's time for The Clash. If you just tuned in, welcome on board. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. So, speaking at Davos earlier this week, Labour Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves insisted that the party has no plans to increase rates of income tax or to introduce a wealth tax, which makes you wonder how she plans to raise any money at all. Oh, let me guess, it'll be from the non-dom tax status. Really? But there are plans. Plans do change, and the party proposes to add levies to private schools, remember that, That, to me, sounds absurd, to reimpose limits on pension savings and to scrap the non-dom status after fueling fears of wider tax hikes. Many are now asking, is your money safe with Sir Keir Starmer? Right, so let me welcome our head-to-headers, former Labour MP Stephen Pound and also Ralph Schulhammer. I must call you Schumacher. I couldn't help myself. I'm going to start with you, Stephen Pound, because you're a Labour man. And I'm wondering, is our money safe with Labour? Come on. The non-dom tax status has been used as for about 15 times now.
But I'm saying every single Labour policy commitment so far is fully costed, and it will not involve any extra tax. I was there in 97 when we came in. We had Gordon Brown, the Iron Chancellor. For the first 2 years, we had this corset laced tight across our body politic where we couldn't make any spending commitments. What I'd say, people say, where's the money going to come from? I tell you where the biggest amount of money has come from. It's actually being a capable and competent government and not spaffing away millions, if not billions, on ludicrous schemes like, upgrading ships and then mothballing them, throwing money at Rwanda and all these nonsensical schemes. I think we could actually spend what we've got a lot better. But the real thing underlying all of this is we're approaching a situation now where our debt is almost equaling our gross national product. The debt overhang in this country is so catastrophically huge that will affect every single thing we do. So with the best will in the world, no government, incoming or present, can actually say we're going to start slashing taxes when we owe that much money, because the minute that we actually lose the ability to repay that debt and the interest, we're back in Liz Truss territory, and then God help us.
Yeah, but let's just recap on some of the things that the Labour have planned to do. They're literally robbing Peter to pay Paul. They're to fund the failing education system. They are planning to take money from the succeeding education system, which is the private side, and use VAT and taxes to tax those who are paying for fees. Now, come on.
No, what they're doing is removing a situation whereby you and I and every taxpayer is subsidising people who want to send their kids to private school and perpetuate inequality.
Yes, but people sending their kids to private schools are subsidising people who are going to other schools.
Come on. This is the thing. I can never understand this. People say, on the one hand, it's only a tiny number of people who go to public schools, and therefore, and on the other hand, people are saying, oh, if they all had stopped going to public schools, they'd all pile into the state sector.
Well, they would do. So it doesn't work, does it?
No, if somebody's paying £40,000 a year now to send a child to school, which is about as much as it costs to put a person in Dartmoor, if you're spending that much money, then if 5-6% is not going to make a difference.
Oh, really? So 5%, 10% that's quite a bit of money, actually.
It's a huge amount of money. It's the sort of money that I couldn't pay in a million years. However, there's no way that I could pay £40,000 to send one of my children to school.
So you should rob Peter to pay Paul. It's really wrong. What do you think, Ralph?
I mean, Stephen always makes the argument it's just a very small number of people. It's just a very small number of people. I think that is, the act of a certain policy. And again, I find this deeply illiberal and also problematic from a democracy viewpoint. Is just to say a policy only affects a few people but leaves the rest untouched, therefore we can do it. From a moral perspective, I'm not fully in agreement with this. And the other thing is, you said it yourself, Western governments, again, it's not a purely UK problem, have been spending money like drunken sailors on shore leave over the last 50 years, right? And yet they still complain all the time, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough money. And I think the problem is on the spending side and not on the revenue side. And as you said it yourself, so much money is spent on ridiculous things. And then to go, because we can discuss about inequality, but I personally would like to have institutions in every country where the very talented, the very gifted have special educations or have special institutions to further, because we have very good evidence from psychology. This idea that's very popular on the left, I don't know your position on this, Steve, but maybe you can enlighten us. This idea that if you just put all the kids together in one classroom and then, let's say, the academically less talented will rise up and those academically very talented will stay where they are. This is not how it works. Both of them get worse. And Britain had, a very famous quote I very much enjoy, I think the Duke of Wellington said it, the Duke of Wellington, that Napoleon was defeated on the playing fields of Eton. British education has been one of the best in the world. I would even claim that India is in a good shape at the moment because the British gave them a fantastic education system. Yeah. And it has been broken over the last couple of years for cultural reasons, for exactly these equality ideas, but not for lack of money.
I should say that the German education system has probably been better.
We broke ours too.
Yeah, well, OK, but I have to say there was a time when Heidelberg was far better a university than Oxford or Cambridge, but that's not the point. Look, as far as I'm concerned, what this keeps coming back to is your point's a very, very good point. If we took everybody from the public schools, and when I go around the public schools in my constituency, and I think it's quite interesting, there are three Labour MPs in Ealing, where I'm from. Two of them were privately educated.
Well, exactly. And Sir Keir Starmer himself benefited from... Well, he did a bit, didn't he? Because
when he went, it was a state school.
Yes, but then it became a grammar school and he got funding.
I think that what's interesting, in France they have a thing called ENA, the École Nationale d'Administration, and virtually, which is a very, very sort of cream of the crop training boarding school for future politicians and administrators. They have, and that argument works, but it's provided by the state. You cannot buy your way into ENA. You cannot buy your way into any of the great universities in Austria and Germany. You have to go in by talent. I've got no problem with that idea of having an elite group of people. I'd love to see an elite group of people. What I do have a problem is that, you know, these private schools, they're like cream. There's people who are rich and thick.
No. This is exactly the perception that is wrong. A lot of these private schools are for people with special educational needs, and the parents...
But that's entirely different.
But they will fall under that umbrella.
No, they will not.
No, they will.
Bridget Phillipson has specifically excluded them.
Well, I'd like to see that work.
I mean, I will give Stephen some ground, because I think what has really shifted in the education system, and we need to talk about this, is of course, at this moment, many institutions don't provide an education; they provide a certificate, and we pretend that people who get out of that have an education. So it's a credentialism, it's a credentials mill. But is it really an education? And I think we have to think very deeply about what a future education looks like. And just one thing. I believe to really make this country work again, everybody who goes to middle school or high school should spend at least half a year either with the armed forces or with farmers or an oil rig or something like this. Like we have created an educated class that is completely detached from the rest of the country, and that's the kind of psychological, cultural inequality is a much bigger problem in my eye than the financial inequality.
Sweden have just decided to do exactly that.
OK, but can we just talk about, very briefly, got about a minute left, talk about another one of Sir Keir Starmer's policies then, because this is the 28 billion that he said that he was going to do for green energy and jobs. And in fact, he's saying that he will do it actually later on now. And it was that policy, the markets were worried that they would be destabilised because of it.
He made that pledge before we had the disastrous quasi-quantag Liz Truss budget, which actually virtually destroyed our international... At that time, we could have borrowed money then.
Wait a minute.
We can't now.
Wait a minute. If you made that policy before, and you're blaming Liz Truss and quasi-Kwarteng...
Damn right I am.
Hold on. He still held on to that policy.
No.
And
he extended the time frame. That's what he had to do.
No. You can't be blaming... because somebody else did it... No.
Sorry, there's nothing wrong with borrowing money. I mean, I borrow money to buy a house. We borrow money, you get a mortgage is borrowing money. There's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, our international competitiveness, as measured by Standard & Poor's and Moody's and people, was absolutely trashed by that brief interregnum with Liz Truss. So that's the reason why it now costs more to borrow money.
One more then. What about the fact that there was that note that said there's no money left when the Conservative Party took up office?
I'm sorry.
Just a quick one.
1964, the outgoing Chancellor of the Exchequer left a note for Jim Callaghan coming and said, sorry, old friend, there's no money left. Every single First Secretary...
this was a joke?
Every single one. It was only when Richard... What's his name? Laws, David Laws came in, who's the Liberal, the first time he'd done it, he said, oh, gosh, I'm not going to take a joke, I'm going to actually try to leak it. Every single Chancellor of the Exchequer, First Secretary of the Treasury, Labour and Tory have always left that note for each other. And they usually leave a bottle of champagne as well. It's an in-joke. And it's only the flipping, self-justifying, pompous little self-opinionated narcissist Liberals who actually decided to make fun of it.
But it's not a joke, though, is it? It's not a joke. It's not funny, especially when there was no money left. They were absolutely right.
I'm sorry,
there's no joke when you say there's no money left and there isn't.
But listen, it's not a joke I would make. It's a joke that Reggie Maudling made in 1964.
OK, so Linda says they should increase the tax threshold. It was criminal when they froze it. OK. John says, Nana, of course, Keir Starmer will take us back into the EU. Of course, it won't be called rejoining, but probably a European cooperation deal or something deceitful like that. And then Ted on Brexit says Brexit isn't safe with any politician, and especially with Khan. And Elizabeth says Hunt should abolish inheritance tax because, besides being a cruel and unfair tax, it is the greatest break on ambition and incentive. I would say that's true. Why bother earning loads of great stuff and buying stuff when you have to give it away in taxes? You do. And a lot of people are falling into the threshold. But right now, let's do this story. We can't let it go. The BBC have identified multiple cases.
Let's all agree on this one.
Serious editorial malpractice following the introduction of a new internal whistleblowing policy. This means the corporation has found itself in breach of its own editorial standards, even after having dedicated a team of 49 at the cost of £2.7 million deployed to help tackle disinformation. So are the BBC in any position to counter disinformation? And let's remind us of the misinformation or the Hamas bomb that they called was that one of their journalists said that there's no doubt that it was an Israeli bomb. I'll go to you, Ralph.
Yeah, I mean, as a foreigner, I'm not sure if I'm really in a position to criticise the BBC.
Oh, go on.
Go for it.
Which has historically, I think, played a very, very important role, particularly also in my country. But it goes back to what we talked about previously about activism of public servants, right? In many ways, I think there are too many activists within the BBC. And there is this idea, again, pervasive all over the West, that everything, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it's called the clash, right? That everything right of centre is so fascism and Nazi adjacent that every means necessary to prevent them from getting a foothold in the public imagination, the public opinion, is justified. And of course, I think you see this with the BBC as well. And that is, particularly for a publicly funded broadcast, I think that is problematic. It's supposed to report, it's supposed to inform. It's not really, I mean, if they have opinion pieces, fine, but it's not supposed to be an outlet for activism. And this is a little bit, I think, what it is.
Well, I'm not a great conspiracy theorist, but I have a theory. I think that GB News have actually inserted some sleepers within the BBC to actually destroy it from within, because it seems every flipping day the BBC does something. So people
hold on a minute. They don't need our help. They're doing it all by themselves.
Okay. Well, all that they're doing. What I'm saying, people like myself who have a slightly sentimental, sort of Lord Reith to educate, inform, and amuse. They think they like the idea of having a state broadcast. They quite like the idea, but every day it's becoming harder and harder to justify A, being legally required to pay the money, and B, to listen to a bunch of wimps waffling on, about this, and they're hoisted on their own petard here because they spent millions of pounds having their own investigation, and they discovered some grievous, egregious cases of misinformation. So, do I lie awake at night weeping for the BBC? Not anymore, I don't. I just think it's going to change, and now we have so many different broadcasting platforms. The monopoly broadcaster day is dead.
That would seem to be the way. That is the way, isn't it? That a lot of people aren't prepared to pay a compulsory licence fee, really, because if you don't pay it, you get...
Is Deutsche Telefunken, did you have to pay for that?
Which one?
German television, is it?
Yes, no, it's very similar. It's similar with BBC, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not a subscription-based...
Oh, no, and they have massive powers. Like, they can literally look into your bank account. So
but in America, they have a different situation whereby there's no requirement to buy a licence. But if you want to listen to public broadcasting, then you can actually opt in, which is, I think, it's not a bad idea.
Interesting. Yeah. So in Germany they do have something like the BBC.
And it's the same debate over there that we have over here, because there's in this sense that there is a kind of certain bias within the public broadcasters, and of course people say if you make fun of 50% of the population, that's fine, but why do they have to pay for it?
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Well, listen, what are your thoughts? GBviews at gbnews.com, or get in touch at GBnews. Listen, on the way, I have my monologue. If you just tuned in, welcome on board. It's just coming up to 54 minutes after 3 o'clock. My monologue. It's on Harry and Meghan's wedding celloist. Now, he has been making comments about last night of the proms. Basically, he can't bear the song Rule Britannia, so he sits it out, even though that was the show that he made his fortune and his career being on. So I'll be discussing that in a couple of moments' time. But first, let's get an update with your weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha very much in charge of our weather over the next couple of days, bringing some very heavy rain and some strong winds too. It'll slowly be moving its way towards us through Sunday evening, bringing that heaviest rain to those western coasts and the strongest winds through the early hours of Monday morning. That rain continues to spread its way north and eastwards later through Sunday, and that's when we see those winds really starting to pick up. Gusts widely 60 to 70 miles an hour along those western coasts, perhaps 80 to 90 across northern parts of Scotland through the early hours of Monday. A milder night than we've seen over recent weeks, perhaps 6 or 7 degrees quite widely, maybe 8 or 9 across the very far southeast, but it's a very windy start to the day on Monday. Winds will gradually start to ease through the morning, but it still will be staying very blustery through much of Monday itself. Showers widely pushing in from the west, these turning particularly heavy at times, perhaps even the odd flake of snow across the high ground of Scotland. There will be some sunshine, particularly further south and further east, and temperatures here maybe 10 or 11 degrees, but with those strong blustery winds, that'll take the edge off those temperatures. Tuesday will start a little bit drier, perhaps some sunshine across those eastern areas through the morning, but the next system quite quickly pushes in from the west. Rain spreading its way north and eastwards, turning heaviest along those western coasts and bringing with it some strong winds too. A little brighter on Wednesday, but further wet and windy weather is on its way later in the week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
If you just joined us, welcome on board. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now stay tuned because coming up in the next hour, my monologue, I'll be talking about the celloist who was the celloist at Meghan and Harry's wedding, and he's complaining about the song Rule Britannia, which is, of course, on that fabulous show the last night of the proms. Stay tuned. Don't forget as well, you can get an update on everything we're doing on the GB News website, or why not download the GB News app where you can watch all the programmes free or stream the show live on YouTube. I'll be back in just a moment with my fabulous panellists Danny Kelly and Christine Hamilton.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Oh, hello. Good afternoon. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. It's just gone 4 o'clock. And for the next few hours, me and my panel, we're taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton. But before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thanks very much and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 4 o'clock. People are being warned not to travel as a string of storm warnings blanket most of the UK. There are several weather warnings in place, including 2 amber wind alerts as Storm Isha sweeps in. Forecasters say there's a danger to life warning of falling trees, power cuts and possible flooding. Winds of up to 90 miles per hour are expected. Our South West England reporter Jeff Moody says conditions will get worse tonight.
The storm's really beginning to take effect now. The wind is really beginning to pick up. The rain has arrived too, and it's going to get a whole lot worse tonight. This is the 9th named storm of the season, and what makes this one unique is it's going to affect the whole of the UK. The Met Office is saying make sure that everything in your garden is secured, fixed down. The risk from flying debris is very, very real indeed. Avoid coastal paths and avoid rural paths too. The best thing you can do is to stay indoors.
And if you're nervous about flying, you might want to look away. Flights coming into London's Heathrow Airport are experiencing some shaky landings. The windy conditions are creating some frightening conditions for passengers, with several flights spotted looking unsteady as they descended into Britain's main airport. Labour says the government's Rwanda plan won't act as a deterrent to migrants entering Britain illegally. Speaking to GB News presenter Camilla Tominey, Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock said tackling the crisis depends upon international cooperation.
There's no way that shipping perhaps 1% of the number of people that come across the channel on small boats to Rwanda is ever going to act as a deterrent. You're dealing with people who are fleeing violence and persecution. By stopping wasting so much time on Rwanda, which is just a gimmick that is doomed to failure, let's plough much more resource and time and energy into doing some of the things that have worked, like the Albania deal. We fully support the Albania deal, and that has worked as a deterrent.
There's been an explosion at a major gas terminal in the Baltic Sea near Russia in a suspected drone strike from Ukraine. Firefighters are battling flames at the site after reports from Ukrainian media suggest a special operation was carried out by security services. Ukraine's government hasn't claimed responsibility. Novatek is Russia's largest natural gas producer. It's now been forced to stop operations at the scene. US troops have been injured in a rocket attack in western Iraq, which was claimed by a group affiliated with Iran. An unspecified number of people are undergoing evaluation for possible traumatic brain injuries. A group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq claimed responsibility for the attack, which is the latest in a series of strikes against US targets in recent weeks. It marks another escalation amid heightened tensions in the region following the outbreak of the Israel-Gaza conflict. The Royal Navy's defences are to be boosted with £405 million of funding amid escalating global tensions. Missiles that have been used to defend ships in the Red Sea will be upgraded, making it the UK's most capable naval air defence system ever developed. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told GB News that Britain is taking a lead.
We're investing £288 billion over the next decade to make sure that we do pump more money into our military, into our equipment, and that we can safely defend ourselves. And Britain's leading the way, as I said, in Ukraine, but actually also this week I announced an operation in Europe called Steadfast Defender, which is a NATO operation, which the United Kingdom's providing 40% of the ground troops and 50% of the overall personnel, even though there were 32 countries in total involved in this. So we really are leading from the front in the UK.
A murder investigation is underway after a teenager was stabbed in Birmingham city centre. West Midlands Police said its officers were called to Victoria Square after the 17-year-old was found seriously injured yesterday. He was rushed to hospital but later died. Anyone who may have taken pictures in the area around the river statue near Victoria Square on Saturday afternoon is advised to contact police. The skies above Berlin were lit up last night as a rare meteor was spotted. Researcher Michael I, who managed to capture the moment on camera, told reporters he was just about to take his dog for a walk when a colleague told him to keep his eyes on the sky. According to Berlin's Planetary Research Institute, it's only the 8th time it's ever been possible to predict the exact time of a meteor sighting. was lucky. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say play GB News. Now it's back to Nana.
Thank you, Tamsin. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. My mother always says, "He who searches for a mule without a fault shall walk." Now, I was speaking to her today about the latest in wokery, a musician who, having enjoyed the fruits of the empire, is now turning his nose up at the song Rule Britannia. Although I shouldn't be surprised because he was the Sussex's wedding cellist. Now, it doesn't get more woke than that. I'm talking, of course, about hypocrite Sheku Kenna Mason, who became famous performing at the last night of the proms, aged just 19. Despite the fact that the show gave him a platform many moons ago, he's now saying this about the song. "I don't think it should be included, and I didn't stay for that. That's just my opinion. I think maybe some people don't realise how uncomfortable a song like that can make a lot of people feel, even if it makes them feel good." Really? But you're quite happy to fly on the coattails of the show, which you would have known when you went to play there, actually had the song, which is a tradition every year. If you felt that strongly about it, why did you go on the programme in the first place? Oh, right, I get it. We all do. You're a complete hypocrite, but that's just my opinion. Ugh. I mean, some people don't realise how uncomfortable. How pathetic is that? I'm sorry, but this is somebody who owes his fame for taking part in the show. The last night at the proms, or of the proms, is everything about being British. Singing Rule Britannia and the subsequent flag waving is tradition. You can't get more British than that. Although one year the corporation, the BBC, was so entrenched in their wokery that they were planning to remove the lyrics. The last night of the proms has been running on the BBC for God knows how long. I'm fed up with hearing from people on the biased broadcasting corporation whose plethora of stars pour out their woke agenda whilst happily supping from the very generous BBC Cup paid for by us, the licence fee payer. This is the same BBC, by the way, who, it has been uncovered through a Freedom of Information Act, has spent £2.7 million of our money on a 49-strong BBC Verify department countering misinformation, and then brought us this from correspondent John Donnison.
You know, it is hard to see what else this could be, really, given the size of the explosion, other than an Israeli airstrike or several airstrikes, because, you know, when we've seen rockets being fired out of Gaza, we never see explosions of that scale. We might see half a dozen, maybe a few more people being killed in such rocket attacks, but we've never seen anything on the scale of the sort of explosion on the video I was watching earlier.
Yeah, really? Well, here is Jeremy Bowen, BBC International editor, explaining how they got the information about the Hamas bomb, by the way, that landed near the hospital completely wrong.
Where were you getting your information, and do you regret anything that you said that night?
So it broke in, I suppose, mid-evening. And to answer your question, no, I don't regret one thing in my reporting, because I think I was measured throughout. I didn't race to judgment.
But you said that building had been flattened.
Oh yeah, well I got that wrong because I was looking at the pictures, and what I could see was a square that appeared to be flaming on all sides, and there was a, you know, sort of a void in the middle, and it was, I think it was a picture taken from a drone. And so, you know, we have to piece together what we see. And I thought, well, that looks like the whole building's gone. And that was my conclusion from looking at the pictures, and I was wrong on that. But I don't feel particularly bad about that.
Really? I couldn't resist bringing that up after a piece in the Telegraph today. But you couldn't make it up. Sheku talked about his experience about being a young black classical musician and artist, and he said, very often in the spaces that I was in, within classical music, myself and my family were very often the only black people in those spaces. He said that most of the time it was fine, but often he wasn't necessarily taken seriously in some situations. Oh, please, bring out the violins. Oh, sorry, you played the cello. Honestly, look, dude, I'm twice your age, and I think me and my family were the only black people in Newcastle. We were like a novelty. I loved it. That's life. Get over yourself. Every country has a history, some good, some bad, but on balance, the empire, in my view, was a very good thing, and people like Sheku have benefited and are in no place to stand on a soapbox of principle while still suckling on its fruit. Here we go, guys. Rule Britannia, Britannia rule the waves. Britain never, never, never shall be slaves. He who searches for a mule without a fault shall walk. Right, before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today for the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, are we ready for war? Now, the Army has failed to reach its recruitment targets for soldiers every year for the past decade. Whilst the prospect of World War III looms, is the UK actually ready? Then at 4:50, it's time for Worldview. We'll cross live to Los Angeles to speak to Paul Dudridge, the host of the Politics People podcast, to get the latest on Donald Trump and his road to potentially becoming the president for the second time, which would be great. That's what I think, but a lot of people don't. At 5, it's this week's Outside. I'm a mystery guest, having spent 17 years in the tank regiment. We'll find out more about his life outside the army as a modern-day veteran. He's quite famous. Who do you think he is? I'll give you more clues on the way. That is in the next hour. Tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. Right, just coming up to 13 minutes after 4 o'clock. Let's get started. Let's welcome again to my panel broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton. Right, I'm going to start with you, Danny Kelly. So what do you think? What do you think of that?
Well, you know, you cherry-picked some of his stuff there so perfectly, and this is the embodiment of what's wrong with society. And I'm going to quote this young lad. I think maybe some people don't realise how uncomfortable a song like that can make a lot of people feel, even if it makes them feel good. You were right to pick that out, Nana, because that encapsulates what's wrong with society at the moment. First of all, he shouldn't feel uncomfortable about it.
No.
And I don't believe him. I just think he's on a soapbox, and I think he's just going along on this social crusade. I don't believe it makes him feel uncomfortable. But that aside, why should the vast majority of people who enjoy singing it stop singing it at the last night of the proms, all because of a titchy tiny minority, whether it's a titchy tiny minority of black musicians who don't want to hear it, or whether it's a titchy tiny minority of another social group away from music?
Well, of course, he says that it's just his opinion and he just sits it out, so he's not saying that it shouldn't be played. I mean, I haven't heard him say that, but it just gets me when people who have benefited from what they're calling empire, or even the show itself, last night of the proms, this is where he made his sort of debut and people heard him, and because of that, he has gone on from strength to strength, and that song has been played every time. Christine?
This fellow, he may or may not be a hypocrite, but what he is pig ignorant. Because
although he's not here to defend himself, so I'll say that.
Well, I'll explain why he's pig ignorant. And people do not understand what Rule Britannia is. It is not. It's not exulting. You know, come on, Britain, we're ruling the waves, and we'll never be slaves. It is exhorting the British people. It was penned in 1740 to celebrate the accession of George I, and we'd had Cromwell and the Standing Army and all that. It was exhorting the British people to come on, rise up, let's get the good old British Navy back. And the clue is in the comma. It's rule, comma, Britannia. And then it's Britannia, rule the waves. Not Britannia rules the waves. It's Britannia, come on, Britannia, rule the waves. Exulting in the Channel, etc. People do not understand what it's about. It's a very patriotic song. It has nothing to do with slavery or whatever his guy might think it has to do with. That's not what it is at all. That's why I say he is pig ignorant, but I know he's not here to defend himself.
But it's the word slave that he takes objection to.
But we're saying that we're not going to be slaves.
I understand your points. I agree with you, but he would argue that it's the word slave shall never be slaves.
Yes.
OK, because he comes from an African heritage where people were stolen and sold to...
Well, no, they weren't stolen. stolen. It was a trade. Let's just get that first of all. Some may have been stolen because there are always bad people, but it was a trade.
They didn't go voluntarily.
No. It was a trade. They were sold. So the Africans sold their own people to become slaves.
Yes, that's correct. People were stolen from their villages, put on ships.
Yeah, but not by the British, not by the white people. It was the Africans who rounded up their people to become slaves and sold them. It was a legitimate trade, so that would have been allowed, although it's not a good trade. It's a bad
I would
trade.
argue if you're forced away from your village, that's theft.
Yes, but by your own people. It's not. The British didn't.
You can have things stolen.
Yeah, no, but my point is that the British didn't come in and say, right, all these black people go. What it was there were black-owned slave businesses.
That's correct.
And they sold the black people to the white slave traders.
I agree. And the ship sailed from Liverpool. Liverpool's part of the slave triangle.
Yeah. All that is all well and good, but it has nothing to do with Rule Britannia. But this is the point. It has nothing to do with what we're discussing.
Well, he might argue that it's the whole trade.
That's his point.
Is the army going out and
he needs to go back to his history. He needs to look up when the song was written, what it was all about, and it is saying, come on, Britain, get off your knees, go out there, do not be slaves.
But he would have had that explained to him. But he doesn't agree with that interpretation.
He doesn't want... If he's not ignorant, then he just doesn't want to know.
Well, the BBC also, do you remember, I think it was in 2020 when they were having the whole discussion about the actual lyrics and they were going to play the song without the lyrics so it didn't offend people, which I think is absurd.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful patriotic song, and if anybody doubts it, any listener, viewer doubts it, go and look up the words, read them, and does that have anything to do with enslaving other people? No, it's come on, Britain, you can do this.
And anyway, what's wrong with saying that you should never be slaves? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm British, I say I'll never be a slave. If I had ever been a slave in my past ancestral life, I would have been a bad one.
You'd have been a bossy one,
I've refused to do it.
Oh,
I'd be like,
they would have sent you back. They would have sent you back.
Listen, no, we don't want this one. This one, no. But what do you think, GBNews at GBNews.com? It's just coming up to 18 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, it's World View. We'll be crossing live to Los Angeles and get the latest from what's going on there. But up next, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, are we ready for war? Now, I've got a poll up right now on X asking you that very question. Are we ready for war? Send me your thoughts. Email tvviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GBNews. Cast your vote now.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. If you just tuned in, where have you been? Well, you've missed almost half the show. No, sorry, it's 21 minutes. I don't bite, not without a good reason. It's coming up to 22 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. We are live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, before we went for a break, I asked you, because I was talking about this Shecky guy who didn't like the song Rule Britannia, even though he was at last night of the proms, and that's where he made his name. But David says, what would he suggest as an alternative? David, I think he suggested a folk song. He did, yes. And then he, in his own words, said that it wouldn't be that popular, so that probably wouldn't work. Probably. And then Stephen says, please read out the verses. It has nothing to do with glorifying slavery, rather the opposite. It is about resisting tyranny and protecting freedom, exactly as Christine said. You are right, Stephen. Sharon says, absolutely wonderful. Let's sing Rule Britannia every chance we get. I almost said Britannica. Do you remember those encyclopedias and those salespeople that used to come to your house to sell them? We had a load of them. And then Ron says, brilliant start, love the sing-song. You clearly get your wisdom from your mum. Mum, did you hear that? Rule Britannia should be our national anthem. It's a celebration of the greatness of the British people. And Jules says, does this boy know about the thousands of sailors who died trying to stop the slave trade? Well, exactly. That's history for you. Thank you so much. Keep them coming. gbviews@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, are we ready for war? Now, a top NATO military official has warned that civilians must prepare for an all-out war with Russia in the next 20 years. Now, this, of course, comes as America and the European generals fear that the UK is no longer a top-level fighting force, as it's been reported that the army will have fewer than 70,000 soldiers. I think that they said soon there'll only be about 50,000, and that's within 2 years. So what do you think for the Great British Debate this hour? I'm asking, are we ready for war? Well, joining me now is political theorist and fellow at the MCC Budapest, Ralph Scholhammer, former Labour MP Stephen Pound, former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley, and former Head of Counter-Terrorism and the MOD, Chip Chapman. Chip, I'm going to start with you. Chip, are we ready for war?
Well, the first question you need to ask is, what's our fight-tonight capability? Against whom and where? So is Russia prepared for war against us, and is it going to go to war with us now? And patently the answer to that is no, because 90% of 22 capability has been degraded. The where is probably most likely in the Baltics.
Oh, Chip, I thought you, there you go, he's gone. He's gone. Well, that's all right, because we've got Charlie. I'm going to go for Charlie Rowley now. You're a former Special Advisor to Michael Gove. Charlie Rowley, are we ready for war?
Well, thanks very much. I mean, you talked about the figures at the top there, the number of armed forces in terms of personnel, boots on the ground coming from 70,000 to about 50,000. I think, look, there is still a role for boots on the ground clearly to be made. We're seeing that in Ukraine. We're seeing that when you're taking the fight to the Houthis. But the question is, what kind of war are we going to be facing when it comes to intelligence, when it comes to our technology, when it comes to disinformation? I think we are probably better equipped than most. So it's a question about what kind of war you think we're going to be facing, whether it's one that's going to be dealt with intelligence and technology versus the number of boots on the ground.
It's interesting, though, that you mention other people, because people, you know, Chip was saying that the others aren't ready, and you're saying that we're better equipped than most. Can we really be comparing ourselves to others when we need to be focusing on whether we can actually do this or not? Ralph Scholhammer, what do you think?
Well, I would say a country that has to discuss whether or not you can sing Rule Britannia is not prepared for any kind of war. It's, I think, very straightforward. We know that even in Great Britain, recruitment numbers are not met. There's a serious problem all over the West. People are no longer willing to die and fight for their country. And just as a reminder, what everyone thinks about Russia in general, I remember very clearly that 2 years ago, we were told that the Russian economy, the Russian war machine is going to collapse within the next couple of weeks. And now all of a sudden, we talk about the 20 years war with Russia. So somebody was wrong at some point, and I think we need to take a hard, cold look into the mirror.
That's a good point, actually. I mean, is Chip back? Because I want to bring him back in. But actually, oh, yeah, you are. Did you? I just noted Ralph's point there, that a lot of people were saying that about Russia, about other things. They said that the ruble would crumble, and yet it didn't in this current war.
No one has really said that, and if Russia believes this to be an existential war for the Ruski Mir, the Russian world, then they'll continue to fight until that time. Russia does have problems. It won't be able to expand its war to other countries, the Baltics or Poland, until it is successful and can regenerate both its personnel and equipment. So Russia isn't likely to do that in a conventional sense for the next 5 to 10 years. That doesn't mean it wouldn't use hybrid operations, including deception, propaganda, subversion, using complete idiots to try and subvert the Western system. We see that through the use of propaganda in the social media sphere.
But Russia isn't the only worry for us. I mean, we've got all the stuff that's going on with the Houthis and Iran. Stephen Pound.
Yeah, today there are 90,000 people in prison in England and Wales. The entire strength of the Royal Navy, the entire strength is just about 30,000. I'm sorry, I don't care what you say. We cannot re-equip and re-up in time that we could. Don't forget, in 1937, 38, 39, rearmament was considered to be a terrible thing. There's actually by-elections against rearmament. And we managed to increase the military capability very quickly. We can't do that nowadays. What we have to do is prepare for war, but pray for peace.
Because we were even talking about we didn't have the personnel to go onto the new ships that we'd built. So that's
the Type 45. She's been mothballed before she's been launched.
Charlie, what's your view then? Because we didn't have enough personnel for the ships. We're struggling to recruit people to join the army itself. The numbers are coming down. And even if, as you said, the type of war has changed and it's not necessarily boots on the ground, we still do need personnel. I mean, you've seen the wars that are currently happening in Gaza and Russia. Lots of people are needed.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the risk that I think people are talking about is the kind of war that you're sort of seeing in Russia in terms of Ukraine and what you're seeing in terms of Houthi on the ground. If you have our opponents who have not got the technology or haven't got the resource, but do have the numbers, and if it does become about a numbers of game, if it does become, combat between man to man, woman to woman on the ground, then of course the UK would be not as advanced as some of our opponents. But it's the hopeful. As kind of what Stephen was saying, the praying for peace, but the hopeful step that we would take is that we would join forces with our allies like US, like Australia, through that the Five Eyes, through the AUKUS group that we've just announced a few months ago, I think back end of last year. So you would hope that there would be lots of coalitions to defend the opponents where there does seem to be a dividing society between the West and the East. But you can only hope that that might be the direction of travel, if you can hope at all that there'd be, you hope that there's no conflict at all. But if there was going to be a conflict, you'd hope that those would be the dividing lines in order to support your Western allies and your partners. But I do think it still comes down to the fact that the technology and the intelligence services and the way in which we can have lasers now, not just bombs, those can be operated by a limited number of people. So we don't actually require necessarily the thousands upon thousands of military trained boots and guns than what we might have done previously.
You don't think so? Chip, is that right, Chip? Do we not really require the numbers that we, because of technology?
No, I think you still need numbers, you still need some mass. Now, there's no doubt that the British Army has taken a number of capability holidays which it needs to reinvest in. The four really are what they call fires, either artillery and long-range missiles, UAVs, drones, electronic warfare, and air defence, along with logistics, that is sustainability and availability, to ensure that you can fight for 30, 40, 50 days. Those are the key things for the Army. But the most important thing for the UK, because we're in Ireland, is the Navy and the RAF. The RAF is part of the integrated air and missile defence system in NATO, and you can't separate the British Army from NATO, which has more vigour and purpose now than it had 2 years ago, which has added the 31st member with Finland, and is likely to add the 32nd member with Sweden. That will make NATO stronger, and that will be the outcome, I think, will be at the Washington summit, the 75th anniversary of this very successful alliance in this summer.
Yeah, but I still worry that we are literally relying on other things like NATO and stuff like that to protect ourselves when we're seeing kind of how indecisive in some respects NATO have been, especially around the conflict with Ukraine. And also, what about the degeneration of our own supplies, Chip? Because we've given lots of things to Ukraine and, you know, these may be old weapons, but we've depleted our own supplies.
Yes, we have, but you've got to remember about munitions. Munitions degrade, so if you're getting rid of overstock, that makes absolute sense. There's a degradation of both the explosive potential of munitions, which is why we use training stocks, and you keep an operational stockpile alongside that. It makes absolute sense to have done that. And it would be safer for us to degrade Russia than potentially having to fight a future war against them in whatever time frame, 10 years, 20 years. Because from a grand strategic perspective, Russia looks in terms of decades or centuries, not 1 year, 3 years or 5 years.
Yeah. I'm going to just come back to you, Charlie, again, though. What about in terms of recruitment of soldiers and things like that? Because even if we think we are slightly ready for war, the fact that the numbers are going down, who would want to be a soldier these days anyway? We don't look after our veterans. You go to the States, veterans are treated like almost, you know, like absolute warriors and gods and legends. But here in this country, our veterans can't even get somewhere to live. In fact, we treat migrants better than our own veterans.
Well, I think that's absolutely right, because, you know, it is a total disgrace in this country that if you're talking about a UK taxpayer giving up a hotel to someone that's broken into the country effectively illegally, and you're still seeing veterans, people who, you're absolutely right, have donned that uniform, that signed up to put their lives on the line to defend all of us as a nation, cannot get that accommodation. That is a disgrace in terms of a society that we are. I'm not saying for a second that we don't need the numbers. I'm just saying we need to have a discussion about, you know, the technology versus the right kind of numbers. I do think, for what it's worth, 70,000 is too low. I think we do need to have probably 100,000 as a base. But I think you're absolutely right. We need to recruit more people. We need to recruit young people. We need to give people that sense of opportunity and hope wherever you're from, whether it's in the north or the south, that actually signing up to the UK Armed Forces, it is something to be proud of. We talk down too much, far too much, our armed services, just as we do all of our other great British institutions because of wokery and all the other things that go on in society. So it's absolutely integral, I think, in schools, in society. People that might have lost their way in life, if they can come back into society by joining the army or joining the armed forces in any capacity to serve their country, to give themselves that purpose, something to contribute to, and something to be proud of, I think would be a good thing.
Well, we get the sentiment, of course. It would be great. So, Ralph, I'm going to come to you then. Is this country, the UK, ready for war? What do you think?
I don't think so, because wars are ultimately won by will and resolve. And while I find those discussions about technology very interesting, I want to remind everyone in this round and your viewers that after 20 years in Afghanistan, we lost the war against the ragtag army with fertilizer bombs and Kalashnikovs. We see the same with the Houthis now in the Red Sea. As far as I recall correctly, British citizens have been taken hostage by Hamas. This is something nobody would have dared a couple of years ago.
OK, so in a word, then, I presume that's no. Stephen Pound, yes or no? Are we ready for war?
We will be, the closer it comes.
But are we ready for war?
At the moment, sadly, no.
No. Charlie, are we ready for war?
We have to be, and I think we just about are, but we can do more.
So yes or no?
Yes.
And Chip Chapman, are we ready for war?
NATO is yes.
Yes. Wow.
Good answer.
Yeah. Wow, really? All right, well, listen, thank you so much to all of you, Major General Chip Chapman, Charlie Rowley, Stephen Pound, and also Ralph Schottenhammer. Thank you so much. Right, that's their thoughts. What are yours? GBViews at gbnews.com. Tweet me at GBNews. On the way, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, are we ready for war? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, Christine Hamilton and Danny Kelly. Still to come, of course, this week's Outside. I'll give you some clues. He spent 17 years in the Tank Regiment, and he has since launched a charity, Mission Motorsport, in 2012. Who is he? Get in touch, GBViews at gbnews.com. But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Nana, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 4:34. Network Rail says 50 miles per hour speed restrictions will be imposed across most routes as a precautionary safety measure amid several weather warnings across the UK. The Met Office has extended its amber wind warning to cover most of the UK ahead of Storm Isha. 2 12-hour wind warnings are in place until tomorrow morning, with gusts expected of up to 90 miles per hour in some areas. Forecasters say there's a danger to life warning of falling trees, power cuts and possible flooding. A murder investigation is underway after a teenager was stabbed in Birmingham city centre. West Midlands police say officers were called to Victoria Square after the 17-year-old was found seriously injured yesterday. He was rushed to hospital but later died. Anyone who may have taken pictures in the area around the river statue on Saturday afternoon are being urged to contact police. There's been an explosion at a major gas terminal in the Baltic Sea near Russia in a suspected drone strike from Ukraine. Firefighters are battling flames at the site after reports from Ukrainian media suggest a special operation was carried out by security services. Ukraine's government has not claimed responsibility. Novatek is Russia's largest natural gas producer. It's now been forced to stop operations at the scene. The Royal Navy's defences are to be boosted with £405 million of funding amid escalating global tensions. Missiles that have been used to defend ships in the Red Sea will be upgraded, making it the UK's most capable naval air defence system ever developed. Thousands of patients with inherited blood disorders are set to undergo a world first in genetic testing. Starting tomorrow, people in England with sickle cell disorder and thalassemia can access the test. It's designed to improve blood matching, reducing the risk of complications during a transfusion. The NHS is the first healthcare system in the world to offer it, benefiting around 18,000 eligible patients. Those are the headlines. You can, of course, get more on all of those stories. Just visit our website, gbnews.com. Now, it's back over to Nana.
Thank you, Tamsin. It's just coming up to 38 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. Coming up, it's Worldview time. We'll cross live to Los Angeles to speak to Paul Duttridge and get the latest on what's going on in the United States. But up next, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, are we ready for war? I've got a poll up right now on X asking you that very question. Are we ready for war? Send me your thoughts. Email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. Cast your vote now.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Just coming up to 42 minutes. I hope you didn't hear that. Christine babbling. 42 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. It's time now for the Great British Debate at this hour. And I'm asking, are we ready for a war? Now, a top NATO military official has warned that civilians must prepare for all-out war with Russia in the next 20 years. And this is what he had to say.
Not everything is plannable. Not everything is going to be honky-dory in the next 20 years. I'm not saying it is going wrong tomorrow, but we have to realize it's not a given that we are in peace. And that's why we have the plans.
Now, this comes as American and European generals fear the UK is no longer a top-level fighting force, as it's been reported that the army will have fewer than 70,000 soldiers within 2 years. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are we ready for war? Well, let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, also broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton. Christine, I need to start with you. Are we ready for war?
No, but I don't think the idea that Putin's going to invade, I think, is bonkers. He is aware of NATO, an article, is it 5, I think, which says attack one and you attack them all. So I think it'd be very foolish to invade a NATO country. The problem is, and Donald Trump keeps reminding us of all this, that Europe doesn't pay its way, and he, as the embodiment of America,
2%
is fed up of supporting the whole of Europe. And he is saying, and if he gets in, he's going to withdraw some defence spending for NATO, and we've absolutely got to step up to the plate, as have some. I mean, there are some European countries who frankly think that defence is what you sit on. It's not what you need to defend the company.
Like that.
God, it took a moment for the penny to drop.
Defence.
It's a good one. Defence is what you sit on. So, no, I mean, I thought that the classic definition of an army was 100,000 using men in the sense of man embraces woman. And we're going down from 85 to 73. No, I mean, it's pitiful. And we've got... at sea, it's even worse.
But can I bring you to your first comment?
No, I don't think we are, yes.
But your first comment was that as if Putin would... There's no way that's going to happen. We said that about Ukraine, and he did.
Yes, but Ukraine's not in NATO. It's invading a NATO country, I think, is the difference.
You know,
and I think he'd be very careful.
Danny Kelly.
Because we would be bound to come to their defence.
But then there's Iran as well.
I wouldn't be surprised if Putin tested that. Because what happens, he invades Poland
or there's some sort of false flag operation, there's some sort of incursion into Poland, just a minor encroachment, and all of a sudden he's testing NATO's resolve. Because what will happen if NATO gets involved... Just let me hypothesise for a second. So he invades Poland, NATO get involved, Russia retaliate, and then the world potentially is at the risk of a nuclear war. Now, Putin knows that the West don't want a nuclear war. Putin's a psychopathic bully, and I wouldn't be surprised if he tested that. And what would NATO do? Would NATO really respond?
Well, we already
have
had a similar test when one of the weapons or one of the missiles fired into Poland. I don't know whether it was a Ukrainian
missile.
I don't know whether it was Ukrainian or Russian.
Yeah.
But either way, there wasn't. You didn't. I was expecting a bit more, but I'm glad they found out it wasn't Russian.
Well, let me ask you a question. If Putin was to invade Poland, and everyone knows that the next step is a nuclear war, would NATO really fight back like we expect them to if it's going to end up in a nuclear war, Armageddon?
Well, the only way... Strength comes from strength. It doesn't come from weakness. And Putin has to know that if he invades a NATO country, NATO would react. He has to know that.
But they might not.
My point is that NATO may not, because it might result in a nuclear war. That's my point.
That sort of talk is dangerous talk.
But he's a psychopath.
Well, he's not. Some people would say that he's a very intelligent person and isn't a psychopath at all, and he's very calculated. And this whole attack on Ukraine was planned. So I don't know about that. But listen, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voices. Shut up, Christine. Your opportunity to be on the show and tell us what you think about the topics we're discussing. Where should we go to? Should we go to... Oh, I love this. We go to Cheshire. Cheshire. Look at this. Oh, look, we're going straight in. Where is she? Elizabeth Hetherington, you're there in Cheshire. Elizabeth, do you think that we're ready for war?
I think absolutely not. Even like regardless of the situation that might occur with Russia, it's important that we should be prepared for war no matter the circumstance. As it's not given that we will always live in times of peace. After all, everything is typically quiet before a storm breaks out. But currently, the British Army has less than 100,000 soldiers recruited, which is completely embarrassing. And instead of coming up with smart ways to solve this problem, the Defence Secretary has instead announced that he's launching an offence to tackle the problem by enlisting female recruits. Of course, the problem is not female recruits. They've never historically been in the military. It's the fact that British men now see no reason to participate in the army, and who can blame them? The army is now used to serve global interests rather than being in the service of one's country in the defence of it, as witnessed in Afghanistan. You know, people have traditionally joined the military not for the benefits of the army, but because they are driven by a sense of duty to protect their country. It's thus patriotism that defines a flourishing military, which today, for whatever reason, the army has tried to leave behind.
Yeah.
I think if we want to be prepared for war, we need to start investing in defence and have a domestic industrial base that we can fall back on to produce weapons. When it comes to recruitment, we need to make the army about patriotism again, take away ridiculous requirements banning people with autism and ADHD from joining, which hasn't historically been there. And most importantly, we need to bring back national service, as will not only help our people prepare for war, but will teach them important survival skills that they may need if a national crisis does break out as well.
Well, listen, we totally agree with that. Here, Elizabeth, thank you very much. She's our great British voice. That's Elizabeth Hetherington in Cheshire. Well, she's right, isn't she, Christine? Should bring back national service?
Of course she's right. We should bring back national service. And apparently you can't have people in the army with tattoos because they couldn't do parade duty. Well, just don't have a tattoo. Well, that's what I heard some bigwig saying.
It's true.
But just tattoos on the face or the hands, no. But if you've got tattoos elsewhere, does it really matter? Or, I mean, it's another example of the Tories, frankly, betraying our national interest. They have plenty of time and energy to worry about whether the Guards' bearskins are made of bearskins or not.
Every soldier I've seen has got tattoos, maybe not above the neck.
Precisely. I know, it's absurd.
I wouldn't bring back national service. If we're on the edge of war, then yeah.
No, bring it back. Well, it's a Marx.
Yes, it would do people a lot of good. A lot of our young would really benefit from a dose of national service. Yes, they would.
Well,
Rule Britannia.
I'll quickly say, Marx says, unfortunately, Russia has technology and numbers, and it has not been degraded militarily or economically. PJ says, why not bring back national service now? Yes, that's what we were saying. Ian says, doesn't matter. We won't have the steel to build the ships and tanks.
No.
You make a good point. Darren says, we are not ready for war. war. They made everyone redundant in 2013. So we need nowhere near the number. Blah, 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 blah. And then finally, Leslie says, unfortunately, I don't think that the young today are patriotic enough to join the armed forces. Well, that's what Elizabeth was saying. But this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'll put my teeth back in. Just coming up, my outside guest, well, shall I give you some more clues? His life outside the army. He spent 17 years in the tank regiment. He's since launched a charity mission, Motorsport, and will be telling us about the big national transition event on the 4th of March that he's getting involved in. But first, let's get some weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha very much in charge of our weather over the next couple of days, bringing some very heavy rain and some strong winds too. It'll slowly be moving its way towards us through Sunday evening, bringing that heaviest rain to those western coasts and the strongest winds through the early hours of Monday morning. That rain continues to spread its way north and eastwards later through Sunday, and that's when we see those winds really starting to pick up. Gusts widely 60 to 70 miles an hour along those western coasts, perhaps 80 to 90 across northern parts of Scotland through the early hours of Monday. A milder night than we've seen over recent weeks, perhaps 6 or 7 degrees quite widely, maybe 8 or 9 across the very far southeast, but it's a very windy start to the day on Monday. Winds will gradually start to ease through the morning, but it still will be staying very blustery through much of Monday itself. Showers widely pushing in from the west, these turning particularly heavy at times, perhaps even the odd flake of snow across the high ground of Scotland. There will be some sunshine, particularly further south and further east, and temperatures here maybe 10 or 11 degrees, but with those strong blustery winds, that'll take the edge off those temperatures. Tuesday will start a little bit drier, perhaps some sunshine across those eastern areas through the morning, but the next system quite quickly pushes in from the west. Rain spreading its way north and eastwards, turning heaviest along those western coasts and bringing with it some strong winds too. A little brighter on Wednesday, but further wet and windy weather is on its way later in the week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, coming up, my outside guest. I've given you some clues. Who is he? GBviews at gbnews.com. But next, it's time for Outside. Paul Doddridge will be live. He's the host of the Politics People podcast. He'll be giving us the latest from across the pond.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, we've got lots of your messages coming. Keep them coming. gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at GB News. Joining me today, my panellists, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also broadcaster and also Christine Hamilton. Well, listen, we were talking about the war and are we ready for war? And I told you to shut up so you can carry on now. Christine?
It was about national service, wasn't it?
Yes, she was
We were talking about national service, I think. Yes, I know that the professional soldiers and the guy you had on earlier, he would say we don't want it because we want professional people, we want volunteers, we want people who want to be there. I think it would do a lot of. Honestly, I sound like an absolute granny, but I think it would do a lot of the youngsters today a hell of a lot of good for themselves. Never mind what it would do to have. They could then go on and do. All right, calm down. I'm all in favour.
Right, let's go.
Of some
All
sort
right,
of community conscription service.
Right, listen, it's time to go now live to Paul Duddridge, host of the Politics People podcast, because it's time for Worldview. Let's cross over live to Los Angeles. Right, Paul Duddridge, talk to me. Trump, he's on a course to win, isn't he, the New Hampshire primary on Tuesday?
Yeah, we're at this ridiculous position with things like New Hampshire. You have to remember, all we're talking about is him competing to be the candidate for the Republican Party, like there's anybody else that's even going to touch him. Nikki Haley just spent $100 million to get like 3 people and a dog to vote for her in Iowa. There is so much money being wasted here by the Republicans on this complete pantomime. So yes, we are now moving into New Hampshire. You just went through the excitement of the Iowa caucus. I'm sure you all enjoyed it there. Now we're in New Hampshire for a primary, which is different to a caucus because it's a secret ballot and people just vote in a traditional way. So that happens Tuesday, and both Democrats and Republican parties are actually participating, although Biden is not included on that ballot because they don't want him competing with anybody else. But other contenders are trying to get those delegate points from Biden on Tuesday, but that's kind of, they're not going to suddenly replace Biden on Tuesday and he's not going to lose. But yes, we are trying to decide whether Trump, who's not even a candidate, he is the leader of a movement, a political movement like you've never seen before. Should he be the candidate in November? So yes, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on that on Tuesday.
I couldn't help, but there was also that piece about, to me it was ridiculous, but they were saying that Trump has something wrong with him because he had some spots on his hand. Does Trump have syphilis, I think it was, or something, because he had spots on his hand, and that was absurd. Is that a piece that's been going on where you are? Have people been talking about that there?
They try. I mean, look, we've got a president who can't make stairs up or down, he's only been seen 5 times in the last 22 days. And there's the candidate with a bit of blood on his hand, 77-year-old, got some blood on his hand. Apparently now he's Henry VIII and he's got some awful He's got some awful medieval STD. It's incredible. Yes, no, it's not really catching on that. I'll tell you, it's interesting you say that, because I would say a year ago, every media outlet would run with every one of these ridiculous stories. They're not now. I'm actually slightly worried that everybody's kind of reporting Trump very respectfully and very... What worries me is everybody that said he wouldn't win in 2016 is now saying he would, and so I'm slightly alarmed. He will win, and I'm just like... Yeah.
But there's nobody else. There's nobody else, frankly. And I like many that believe, even the most left of left are now actually acknowledging that had he been at the helm, we probably wouldn't be in the state we're in. Listen, Paul Dadridge, we're out of time. But next time, we need to get you on earlier. But you take care. Always great to speak to you. I know it's not your fault. You shouldn't tell me it's not his fault. He's the host of the Politics People podcast. This is GB News. Stay tuned, because I've got loads more to come in the next hour. Hello and welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. On the way, my outside guest. Now, he is a mystery. 17 years in the tank regiment, recognised the overall privilege of commanding soldiers during his deployments in the US and Afghanistan. He became passionate about positive outcomes for military personnel. What else can I tell you? Oh, he launched Mission Motorsport at Thruxton Motor Circuit on the 1st of March in 2012. And the Forces Motorsport charity, whose motto is Race, Retrain, Recover, is the MOD's competent authority for motorsport. So what do you think he is? gbviews@gbnews.com. And then after that, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And we'll be discussing net zero. But first, let's get your latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Nana, thank you, and good evening from the GB Newsroom. It's 5:01. The whole of the UK is bracing for severe weather this evening, with gusts of up to 90 miles an hour expected to cause havoc. 2 amber wind alerts are in place as Storm Isha nears landfall. Network Rail is among several train companies, warnings of delays and cancellations, with speed restrictions now in place. Forecasters say there's a danger to life in some areas, warning of falling trees, power cuts and possible flooding. Our South West England reporter Jeff Moody says conditions will get worse tonight.
Storm's really beginning to take effect now. The wind is really beginning to pick up. The rain has arrived too, and it's going to get a whole lot worse tonight. This is the 9th named storm of the season, and what makes this one unique is that it's going to affect the whole of the UK. The Met Office saying make sure that everything in your garden is secured, fixed down. The risk from flying debris is very, very real indeed. Avoid coastal paths and avoid rural paths too. The best thing you can do is to stay indoors.
Well, flights coming into London's Heathrow Airport are experiencing some shaky landings in the weather. The windy conditions are creating some frightening conditions for passengers, with several flights spotted looking unsteady as they descended into Britain's main airport. Labour says the government's Rwanda bill won't act as a deterrent to migrants entering Britain illegally. The plan would see asylum seekers arriving in the UK sent to Rwanda to have their claims processed. Speaking to GB News presenter Camilla Tominey, Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock said tackling the crisis depends upon international cooperation.
There's no way that shipping perhaps 1% of the number of people that come across the channel on small boats to Rwanda is ever going to act as a deterrent. You're dealing with people who are fleeing violence and persecution. By stopping wasting so much time.
A murder investigation is underway after a teenager was stabbed in Birmingham city centre. West Midlands Police said its officers were called to Victoria Square after the 17-year-old was found seriously injured yesterday. He was rushed to hospital but later died. Anyone who may have taken pictures in the area around the river statue near Victoria Square on Saturday afternoon is advised to contact police. There's been an explosion at a major gas terminal in the Baltic Sea near Russia in a suspected drone strike from Ukraine. Firefighters are battling flames at the site after reports from Ukrainian media suggest a special operation was carried out by security services. Ukraine's government has not claimed responsibility. Novatek is Russia's largest natural gas producer. It's now been forced to stop operations there. The Royal Navy's defences are to be boosted with £405 million of funding amid escalating global tensions. Missiles that have been used to defend ships in the Red Sea will be upgraded, making it the UK's most capable naval air defence system ever developed. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told GB News that Britain is taking a lead. Apologies, we'll hear from Grant Shapps a little later on. Now, the skies above Berlin were lit up last night as a rare meteor was spotted. Researcher Michael I, who managed to capture the moment on camera, told reporters he was just about to take his dog for a walk when a colleague told him to keep his eyes on the sky. Experts say it's only the 8th time it's ever been possible to predict the exact time of a meteor. It's good timing. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, it's back to Nana.
Good afternoon. If you just tuned in, welcome on board. It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and also broadcaster and journalist Annie Kelly. Still to come, each Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP or someone who's had an extremely interesting career to take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows, lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today, I'm joined by a man who spent 17 years in the Tank Regiment. Now, he launched and is a CEO of the charity Mission Motorsport. He's a board member for the Invictus Games and will be telling us about his veteran national transition event that's coming up on the 4th of March. Any guesses who he is? gbviews@gbnews.com. Then, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is net zero built on lies? Climate chiefs have admitted net zero plans are based on insufficient data. Well, I'll be discussing the reliability of the wind and solar farms to see how we achieve net zero and whether we can actually do that. Or is it just a big gimmick? Then stay tuned for the mini-debate. I'll be talking about BBC editorial standards as at least 2 members of staff engaged in malpractice, according to the broadcaster's new internal whistleblowing policy. You won't want to miss that. As ever, email gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet me at gbnews. It's time now for this week's Outside, where we take a look at somebody's life, take a look at somebody who's had an extremely interesting career, and take a look at life outside the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. Now, I'll give you some clues. I'm joined by a man with a very distinguished career. As I said earlier, it spans 17 years in the Royal Tank Regiment. He's been committed to support those whose lives have been impacted by military service, and he founded Mission Motorsport, a charity dedicated to helping veterans race, retrain and recover. He's helped over 1,100 veterans and helped them find jobs. Who do you think he is? Of course, he's former tank commander James Cameron. Not the film guy.
Not the film guy, no.
Yes, James, so lovely to meet you. So lovely to meet you.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
really
thank you so much. We'll start with you then. What's your backstory? Where were you born and how did you end up in this sort of line of work?
Well, so I'm a Yorkshireman who always knew, I think from quite a young time at school, that I was going to serve. And so after university, joined the army. And from there, it's the Royal Tank Regiment after Sandhurst, and was initially posted out to Germany. So I kind of got to see a little bit of how the army used to live, the British Army of the Rhine for years. But of course, mid to late 90s, things started to change. And I then found myself, after some early time on tanks, in Kabul in December 2001, so pretty close after the September the 11th attacks, and then when I came back from there the following year, was then into Iraq and was fairly busy from that point onwards. I was in Helmand commanding the armoured group, which was a task between 2010 and 2011 that really sort of saw me back on armour, kind of in the thick of things.
So were you around, is that Prince Harry's time in the armed forces as well, did you?
So I overlapped with Harry a couple of times in Afghanistan, but never thought I'd end up doing what I'm doing now, which is running a service charity. In fact, I think it's a terrible idea, and I thought it was a terrible idea for some time. But it's the right way to use money in the right transparent way so that people can see on what it's being spent.
Well, what drew you to the army? Because there's a whole thing now where they're struggling to recruit anybody, really. The numbers they're thinking in the next few years will be down by another 20,000. What was it that drew you to it, and what, in your view, do you think is going wrong as to why people just don't want to join?
It's always difficult, traditionally, to recruit for the armed forces when employment in the country is at a very high level. And at the moment, we've got almost unprecedented high levels of employment across the country. So the military, all three services, have to compete with lots of other compelling careers that people could do. Whereas when the pendulum swings the other way, it's much easier for the armed forces to be able to recruit. It's up to the armed forces to be able to articulate the amazing things which you can do and the opportunities that it gives you in order to be competitive against all of the other things that school kids might see themselves interested in doing. So I think the economic conditions of the country have got an awful lot to do with it. And there's also a little bit of, I have a 17-year-old at home who, I struggle sometimes to motivate and to get pointed in the right direction. And it's not necessarily about what appealed to me back in the day in the same language. We've got to find the right language to be able to appeal to him and his peers so that he can see the amazing opportunities that do exist in the armed forces.
We need to put it on TikTok.
Yeah, we absolutely do. Lots of things which are, quite alien or just simply didn't exist, when I was sort of coming through. But I remember lots of criticism of PlayStation generation. But it was the PlayStation generation that I deployed with to Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were lions. They were extraordinary.
Now, what do you think of? Because you said that you crossed over your time with Prince Harry, and obviously he's in the news a lot. Obviously, you don't need to give us too much detail, but we are curious. When you read the memoir, if you read his spare memoir, and he gave that kill count to 25, he said, well, what was your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a very sort of helicoptery thing about battle damage assessment that breaks down things in terms of numbers. So he had quite a different military career than I did in order to be able to talk about things like that. So that does feel quite alien, I think, for quite a few people who've served. But there's something quite specific about his role in helicopters that perhaps then gives you that kind of language. What I do know is he went off script in 2013, I think, when he was visiting an American thing called the Warrior Games, and went off script and invited everybody to this event that we'd be holding in the UK very soon. And, I know the staff officer in the MOD who spat his cereal back into his bowl and went, what on earth have you committed us to? And that became the Invictus Games. Right. Now, I was out in Dusseldorf for this last Invictus Games that's just gone and was fascinated, particularly because it was Germany and Dusseldorf, a city that I know well. I used to be based out in Germany. And the way which the Germans perceive military service has traditionally been very different from how we do. And listen to the defence minister speak in extraordinarily emotional terms about their responsibilities towards Ukraine. And he got a standing ovation which interrupted him mid-speech. And I saw this chap grip the podium, and looking in front of him, Team Ukraine were getting to their feet, those of whom were actually able to. And it's amazing. And you think, and you saw the guy falter. And the round of applause which he got from a packed stadium in Invictus that was then televised, you think, what an incredible thing that still has. I was really interested to see if it still had the same power that it did back in September 2014 when we first did it. Harry's vision was extraordinary, but it continues to find new impetus, I think. And for Boris Pistorius, who is the German defence minister, he will remember that moment to his dying day. He is the guy who was arguing in the German parliament for commitment to support to the Ukraine cause and for the amount that they contribute towards defence spending and all else with it. Invictus will have had a part, will have had a founding, influential role on his opinion making. So, yeah, I haven't read the book. I've read bits of it.
Yeah, we've all read bits of it.
But to be perfectly honest, I think Harry is never more comfortable than when he's around soldiers.
Yeah.
And he is wonderful with them, and he's very much one of them. And I think there's always a piece of him that'll have a very strong focus on that. And I've seen it very recently that he remains kind of committed to that sort of thing. And I'm very grateful to him for it, because the easy thing to do would no longer to be doing those sort of things, and he very much does.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that's the good thing that he's put together. So may that continue. So what about you now? So you mentioned that you've worked with Johnny Mercer.
Yes, so we have a Minister for Veterans Affairs now in the country. Johnny is a really interesting politician, and I think he would lead with that just as much, because he never wanted to be a politician. I don't think he'd ever voted. I have to and do steer away from the politics of things, but it is refreshing and interesting to hear people who talk in those kind of terms. And a little bit like Harry, he's also very comfortable and very on confident ground when he's amongst those who've served. The big thing that the Minister has been successful in doing is taking veterans' care out of MOD and making a place in central government, in the Cabinet Office, that is interested in veterans' issues. So why
is that a good thing? Why would the Ministry of Defence not be capable of looking after their veterans?
Well, it's interesting if you look at the Australians, who I think did it in the 1950s, the Canadians in the 1960s, and the Americans after Vietnam in the 1970s, realised that their departments of defence were focused on defence outputs. So right now, we want our MOD to be really focused on what's happening in the Red Sea. We want them to be really focused on what's happening in Ukraine. Okay. We want them to be getting recruitment and retention right in order to be able to help us prosecute, the enemies of the Crown and our country. The levers that veterans need at the point they've left that really help them in their lives, the MOD only owns compensation and pensions. But to have something that is sat outside the MOD in central government that can speak into the regions, can talk into health, can talk into departments of work and pensions, can look after families and do that join up across government, is much more effective. And I think what we're seeing is a renewed kind of focus on veterans' issues, which is something to be celebrated.
It's so important, because it's not fair. These people have gone out to fight for this country, and then a lot of them commit suicide afterwards. There's nothing there for them. And we are treating migrants, and I would say far better than our own veterans, which I think is disgraceful.
Well, there's an interesting narrative around this. I mean, you're absolutely right. These are people who have given a huge amount for the country, and we've also invested in an awful lot in them. And if we allow them to be underemployed or unemployed or under a bridge or worse, a suicide statistic, then we're kind of letting ourselves down as a nation. And it's absolutely on us as a society to be able to help them to thrive, to support their families, and in turn allow the country to celebrate and benefit from the efforts of these extraordinary people. However, I think that there is an enormous amount more which is being done for veterans. There is a very easy line which is trotted out that there isn't help there isn't support, and people don't care. It is false, for example, that the suicide statistics amongst veterans are higher than the general population. That's not true. They're lower. And there is a corrosive narrative that we've all got a responsibility to push back against, to make the point that for a proportion of our veterans, they struggle and they need help and they should have it. And what we're seeing as a government, I think, that's starting to join up things, whether it's Op Courage, looking at mental health provision, or Op Restore, which is looking at physical health things, or the work which has been done around rough sleeping. That focus never existed before. Yeah. And absolutely, it's important that veterans feel that there are people in society that care about them and that they shouldn't have their heads down and feel disenfranchised as a result.
So talk to me about your, because we're running out of time now, I could talk to you for ages, your national transition event.
Oh, it has just been a wonderful thing. So, of course, you know, you mentioned at the beginning, I mean, I began by running a sports recovery charity that uses motorsport to get people off the sofa and engaged. But fundamentally behind it is an automotive industry that's desperate for people of quality to be able to help that industry to thrive. We run an event this year. It's on the 4th of March. It's called the National Transition Event. Very easy to find if you go looking for it. Which is open to those from the armed forces community and their families who are looking for employment. And we bring together veterans who are working successfully in industry to help them to network with those who are coming along behind to help lift them up and help them make their, through transition in military terms is...
I was going to say,
it's a different...
Transition, what to?
It's a very different sort of phrase, but it's coming from that culture where you're serving in the Army, Navy or the Air Force and finding your way into being a successful civilian.
Do you wish you'd called it something else?
Well, to be honest, it's not my terminology. I think others have come along afterwards and made it mean something slightly different. But
and if people want to find out about that, there's a website, is there? Or...
Absolutely. So Mission Motorsport's very easy to find, and the nationaltransitionevent.com will help people to find it.
Well, listen, James, thank you very much for coming in. It's lovely to talk to you.
My pleasure.
That is James Cameron. He's a former tank commander. Well, stay tuned. It's just coming up to 21 minutes after 5 o'clock. Coming up are Gary Neville and his new fellow Dragons, too woke to fire up Britain's army of young business brains. But up next, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is net zero built on lies?
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. If you just joined me, welcome. It's just coming up to 25 minutes after 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We are live on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. It's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is net zero built on lies? Recent revelations suggest the Britain's Climate Change Committee may have relied on insufficient data for key net zero recommendations. Now, a study on future energy supplies by Sir Chris Llewellyn-Smith claims that the CCC, so I'm referring to them as that now, based its pronouncements on the extent the UK can rely on wind and solar farms on just a single year of data. So obviously, this raises questions about the accuracy and reliability of their projections by only relying on 1 year's worth of weather information. The CCC stand by their analysis, but as we continue to debate on the feasibility of net zero further, are we being sold a lie? So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is net zero built on lies? I'm joined now by Jim Dale, Senior Meteorologist of the British Weather Service, Ben Pyle, co-founder for Climate Debate UK, and John Grant, Senior Lecturer in Sustainable Construction and Climate Change. Well, I'm going to start with you, Jim Dale, seeing as you blew me out yesterday. Jim Dale.
I blew you out.
You blew me out. You were meant to be on yesterday and you blew us out. Honestly.
Yeah,
where are you anyway? Have you gone abroad? Are you on holiday?
No, I'm back at the ranch. Loads of interviews today. You know what? We got a big storm outside. It's just about going through, starting to go through London now. Just a sort of reason why we might actually be talking net zero. Night storm of the season, and it's a huge one, and it will only get worse through the night. It's an amber.
What about
it's
the lies, though, Jim? What about the lies? What about net zero?
I'm not sure they are lies. And do you know what? The problem with net zero is the name, to be frank with you. I think it gets lost in the woods somewhere in terms of what it actually means, what we're trying to achieve. I prefer to call this climate mitigation or climate change preparedness. Reason? Because I think that's most people with any sense, any common sense whatsoever would support that. Net zero is a little bit like, one of those things that somebody sort of dreams up. It's the exchange, the Earth's exchange for CO2 up and down, the greenhouse effect. Now that was, we've all done that at school. What we're trying to do is make that equal.
Jim,
that's what net zero is.
Yeah, but we have talked a lot, Jim. And one of the big things that you've always said is that climate predictions are based on the bigger picture, not just 1 year here or there. And here's evidence that this particular projection was based on just 1 year's worth of data. And a lot of people are relying on that.
Yeah, I haven't got that paper in front of me, but even if it was, sufficient has happened in this last year globally to suggest that it is much needed. And as I say, it's climate mitigation, it's preparedness, that's a direction of travel. But you know, and I know, because we've had this conversation many times, going back over since 1850, the charts that I showed you last time around.
Look, Jim, I appreciate the 1850 thing, which is 100 and something years, which, again, in my view, isn't enough. But 1 year certainly isn't. Ben Pyle.
Well, I think if we were going to find out whether they were lying or not, we'd probably need a mind probe. But there's certainly some, it looks like there may be some fibbing going on somewhere down the line. It's important to remember that the disagreement between the Royal Society and the Climate Change Committee at the moment is one between two organisations that are both pretty much committed to net zero. We really need to broaden this discussion out, or the debate about this kind of thing out. These studies, both organisations' studies were based on modelling, and modelling is just scientific speculation. But we've had 20 years of climate policy based on these models, to try and work out whether that policy agenda is working or not. And I would suggest in that 20 years, domestic energy prices, or domestic electricity prices, have tripled. So there's the proof of the pudding. There's the proof of the modelling, and it's unfortunate for both of those organisations that this revelation, it's quite long in the making, has come in the wake of Vattenfall pulling out of British wind power projects in the North Sea, and of course Ørsted last year threatening to pull out of wind farm development in the UK, but then being given a 66% increase in the subsidies they're being offered by the government to provide wind power. And then further, another blow to that is today, of course, the boss of Siemens Energy saying that the government's promises of green energy, of renewable energy at low cost, are a sheer fantasy. And he made those comments at Davos, of all places, today. So it looks pretty devastating for the wind sector. And I think what the lies have been, and they have clear lies, that we're going to get green jobs out of this, and we're going to get green growth out of that. In fact, the green economy, according to the ONS, is pretty much stagnant and has been for the last decade, even despite all of that.
Let me bring in John
support.
Grant. John Grant. John.
Yeah. So this idea of stagnation in terms of the economy of this is fundamentally because the government has had a no wind turbine on land policy. So of course there's some stagnation in the economy with regards to that. But there's been a lot of research done that has put the numbers of extra jobs in the hundreds of thousands, and before 2030, 2040, as many as 3 million extra jobs. But going back to this idea of lies, the idea of insufficient evidence or insufficient data collection does not mean it's a lie. We've been collecting data on how windy the UK is for decades. If it's not a lie, what do you call it? We know that the UK is the windiest country in Europe.
Yeah, but that's not the point.
Sorry?
That's not the point, though. If we know it's a lie...
yes, it is. We have a huge resource that we're the Saudi Arabia of wind, and the idea that because they only took 1 year's data, which is, there's some questions there. But if anything,
but there are
the data
questions there. That's the thing. Listen, you're saying there's some, sorry, John. You're saying there's some questions there, and then you're just brushing over it. But the question is, we were told they've used projections from just 1 year's worth of wind to work out the figures or the amount of wind supply that we could use and how much we're going to rely on wind. And it's just not enough. You, as an expert and a lecturer in sustainable construction, would never make your projection based on just 1 year. Surely even you wouldn't do that.
No, I say, that's what I said. Yeah. We need to collect more data. But this idea of delaying until we are absolutely certain, this idea that perfect is the enemy of the good, we have to act now. We are in the midst of an ever-accelerating changing climate, and we have to have a plan that is us backing down. This throwaway statement that our politicians have, that the UK is doing a great job because we cut our carbon emissions by 40% by switching from one fossil fuel to another fossil fuel, that's a lie. That's a lie. That isn't a shift down. That's just a profit-making scam. We are not on a pathway to zero carbon. You should be happy about that. I'm distraught because we need to be on that if we are to have a chance and play our part in what is the greatest challenge of humanity.
You say that, but again, the data that you are using to work that out may well be based on that sort of flimsy amount of evidence as well.
Not.
Once again,
it's not.
We may find Jim Dale's shaking his head. It's not, is it? Are you sure?
No,
20 seconds, and then I'm going to finish with. I'm going to give Jim 20 seconds, and I'm going to come to Ben, and then.
Yeah, you've just got to look beyond that one piece of evidence, if you like. It's one piece of a jigsaw, of a massive jigsaw that's going on all around us, right across. And what Ben's doing is taking us back to the 19th century, the polluted 19th. So we need to be acting with.
Yeah, but you haven't even read it there. You said it yourself. So it's a piece of a jigsaw that you haven't read. Finally to Ben Powell, last word to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the jigsaws is about, and maybe we should be talking about wind farms. Look, and John's comment is that we haven't been, that the government hasn't been committing to this. That's not true. The government's committed an awful lot of this, a lot to this, and it's failed. The amount of wind power that's coming online in the next 5 or 6 years is 4 times greater than that which has already been built in the last 4 years, and that's why we're starting to see this agenda collide with reality, because the expenses, the bottom line, has been creeping up and up and up and up and becoming more expensive. And now it's too much for the consumer to bear.
Yeah, well, net zero. I've got to go because I've got to go to the news. But you said the net zero was the wrong description for it. It's just literally the description of how much will be left in your bank account by the end of it. Listen, Jim Dale, thank you very much. Ben Powell, good to talk to you, and also John Grant. Great to talk to you. So what do you think at home as you listen now? 35 after 5. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We'll continue with the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, is net zero built on lies? What are your thoughts? Joining me later will be author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. Here are the headlines at 5:34. The whole of the UK is bracing for severe weather this evening, with gusts of up to 90 miles an hour expected to cause havoc. 2 amber wind alerts are in place as Storm Isha nears landfall. Forecasters say there's a danger to life in some areas, warning of falling trees, power cuts and possible flooding. Network Rail is among several train companies warning of delays and cancellations, with speed restrictions now in place. ScotRail expects all services to be suspended on Monday morning. A murder investigation is underway after a teenager was stabbed in Birmingham city centre. West Midlands Police say its officers were called to Victoria Square after the 17-year-old was found seriously injured yesterday. He was rushed to hospital but later died. Anyone who may have taken pictures in the area around the river statue near Victoria Square on Saturday afternoon is being urged to contact police. Scotland's First Minister has told the Labour leader that it's time to put political differences aside. Humza Yousaf has invited Sir Keir Starmer to visit Bute House in a bid to repair relations following a rift over Sir Keir's decision not to scrap the 2-child benefit cap. Mr Yousaf says Scottish independence remains a priority, but insists there are other matters to be worked on too. Thousands of patients with inherited blood disorders are set to undergo a world first in genetic testing. Starting tomorrow, people in England with sickle cell disorder and thalassemia can access the test. It's designed to improve blood matching, reducing the risk of complications during a transfusion. The NHS is the first healthcare system in the world to offer it, benefiting around 18,000 eligible patients. Well, don't forget, you can get more on all of those stories. Just visit our website, gbnews.com.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK. Here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
24, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon. If you've just tuned in, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's just coming out to 41 minutes after 5 o'clock. And it's time now for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is net zero built on lies? Recent revelations suggest that Britain's Climate Change Committee, or CCC, we'll call them that from now on, may have relied on insufficient data for key net zero recommendations. So Chris Llewellyn-Smith's study on future energy supply highlights that the Climate Change Committee based its pronouncements on wind and solar farms solely on a single year of data. So this raised serious concern about the accuracy and reliability of their projections. Now, the Climate Change Committee stands by their analysis, but it sparks a crucial debate on the true feasibility of relying on achieving net zero. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is net zero built on lies? Well, joining me now, my panel, broadcaster and author Christine Hamilton, also journalist and broadcaster Danny Kelly. Is it based on... What are you laughing at, you two?
Well, first of all, your stern glance at me, and then
Christine.
the juxtaposition, Christine's beautiful, warm, friendly smile. My brain couldn't quite balance them both.
Go with a friendly one, Danny.
Oh, I will do.
I'm here to protect you against Nana.
Very much indeed.
Right.
Net zero.
Lies is a strong word. Is the batch of evidence sufficient in order to come up with a calculation? I'm going with the scientists. If a scientist or the vast majority of scientists tell me that CO2 is causing the planet to heat up, I go with it.
But even if the scientist said, I've based that just on 1 day's worth of evidence, because that's just...
1 day's...
Well, this is 1 year, and think about how old the planet is or how much time we've had wind in this country. If you're going to come up with a solution to the crisis and you're going to estimate the amount of wind that will be generated and yet just use 1 year's worth of data, how much wind and sun is going to be generated, you're going to find yourself...
I would be sympathetic to the scientists because 12 months is a decent batch of time for you to figure out how windy an island is.
What, over a year, over an annual period? So 1 year...
Yeah, well, you have winter. Maybe it's windier in the winter. Maybe it's less windy in the summer.
Are you having a laugh?
No, I'm not.
Even they know it's wrong.
No,
even they know. Even they would admit that that was ridiculous.
The whole thing... I mean, two of your guests there sort of ganging up on the guy in the middle. And it's the futility of it all that I find so desperate. It's the fact that we are doing, like the Port Talbot steelworks closing down. It's the futility of it. I mean, those two, Jim and John, I think John was the guy's name, they and all of the like-minded experts, they should really focus all of their attention and all of their efforts on countries that are just ignoring it.
All right, let me try another way to get through to you on this. Right.
Oh, you got through to me, it's just I don't agree with you.
Would you choose your football team based on watching just one match?
Over a season.
No,
that's a terrible question.
Over a season.
That's a terrible
over
question.
A season.
Because
so you're saying
you've gone for the jugular there.
It's the wrong analogy. Football.
It is not the wrong analogy.
It is because people support the football teams because where they fall.
No. But based on the one match, if you had 10 teams from the same place, based on one match, which would you support a team based on that?
I can only imagine if I was flying into the country like an American and I said, OK, I'm living here now, I've got to choose a football team, I would pick whoever the most successful team is.
Right.
So I'd go with Liverpool.
No, based on one match.
I'd go with Liverpool.
Listen, imagine none of them have played a match and you chose based on one match. They'd all played one match. You'd base it on the one match.
I'd base it on whoever the best was, because I have no regional connection with football.
You're not listening to what I'm saying.
I am!
No, you're not
I
using...
disagree with you.
No, you shifted the analogy. The analogy is about the amount of information that you have on something. And if you're basing it on which one has been the most successful, you're now basing it on several matches, and you've worked out which one's the most successful. But I'm saying base it on just one match.
One match?
Exactly.
Well, I'd choose whoever the best was.
But you
That's why it's a bad analogy.
It's not a bad analogy. You've just proved that it's a good one. Christine.
Oh, dear, I can't believe it. With the greatest respect to the beautiful game, I mean, you are trivialising something which is destroying this country. I mean, this rush to net zero. You say scientists as though all scientists are agreed.
I didn't. I said the majority. I qualified.
But that's not true, then.
I said the majority of scientists.
There's a huge push that we should all just swallow all this stuff. There's lies, damn lies and statistics. This net, and you mentioned Tata Steel. Why are we closing down the Tata Steel thing? Because of a rush to net zero.
Yeah,
it's absurd.
Also because apparently it's not making money, so it's losing money and things. So it's apparently a financial decision as well as just a, So
it's a business decision.
It's a business decision.
America is now virtually, if not completely, self-sufficient in her energy supplies. We are miles, because they've done fracking. We aren't doing that. We could frack, we could keep going our old fossil fuel, etc., etc. We're not doing that. We've got our heads in the sand. I blame Theresa May. She brought this net zero business. It is such a serious impact on the whole of this country that is the sort of thing we should, frankly, have a referendum about it.
Yeah.
Do you want to rush to net zero? Yes or no?
But you know what happens with referendums. There's all these people in the way to try to stop you getting to where
That was a throwaway remark about a referendum. But all the time we are exporting our guilt to places like China and India. They are belching stuff out. China is building 250 coal-fired power stations every week all over the world somewhere. They're belching out the carbon, etc., etc. Are you telling me to stop?
No, not you. I'm talking to them. No, if I wanted to tell them to stop, the words would just be coming out of my mouth.
And so we are allowing them, frankly, to do our dirty work for us, so it gives all our wokerati over here a clean conscience.
So I'm wondering, so are you saying, so this is 1 year of data they've used?
Yes, of course you can't.
You don't like it. You don't like it. It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
You cannot.
Because you even had to say the best team, which means that you would have looked to assess their performance over a period of matches. That's the point.
This is far more serious than football, and of course you can't base anything on just 1 year. It's absurd.
It is absurd.
It's utterly absurd.
But let's see what they think, because this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voices, their opportunity to be on the show and tell us what they think about the topics we're discussing. They think we're mad. I've got a full review. Well done, I'm glad. Let's go to Lee. Lee Webb in Bedfordshire. Lee.
The science isn't correct with a lot of this net zero thing. You've got some scientists that will say, yeah, absolutely, we're going to be sort of like down in about 50 years' time. You've got other scientists that are saying that net zero, we can't achieve it. We do 1% of it. There's about 0.4% carbon in the atmosphere. And the Germans are now bringing in coal-fired power stations. Chinese are definitely doing it. The Indians are doing it because they know it's reliable. You know, so I don't know why we're going down this road. And we've just seen lately with the 3,000 workers at Port Talbot that have been made unemployed because of this rush for net zero. And I've seen some of these towns up north, north of Newcastle, Ashington. You know, when the mines went, nothing ever replaced them. And I can see that happening at Port Talbot. You know, when them jobs go, nothing's going to replace it. We've been there, we've done it before, you know.
Well, it is a worry, but they would say that it's a business decision and that these things weren't profitable and they had to do it because they could get cheaper steel elsewhere and blah, blah, blah. I think it's commercial suicide and very dangerous for this country to be exposed in that way, but that's how they see it. Right, let's go to Gareth Wynne-Jones, who's there in Snowdonia. Gareth.
Good evening. Yeah, honestly, it's just so frustrating. You know, they're talking about culling 41,000 cows in Ireland now to bring the nitrate levels down. You know, we had ruminants on God's earth before we were here. You know, there was bison and buffalo and farting and burping, excuse my language, but that's the truth. We need to address this situation. And I believe farmers are getting blamed for a lot of this, you know. You can see what's happened in Germany. You can see what's happened in the Netherlands. It happened in Canada. It's happened in New Zealand. It's happened in France. You know, this is a push for net zero, and it's going to make everybody very, very hungry. Yeah. We are sleepwalking into food shortages. And not just that, in Wales now, there is a talk about this new policy that 10% of every single family farm and farmland will have to have woodland on it, planted woodland. Let's not forget, Nana, that it's going to take 10 to 15 years for them trees then to draw carbon in. So they aren't going to be, you know, a solution. So we're going to be hungry and we're going to have plenty of trees.
I've got to move on because I'm getting towards the end of the show, but I love your contributions every time. Thank you. Julie Ford in Bedfordshire.
Yeah, hi. I agree with everyone's point. I don't think we're being blatantly lied to, but I certainly think we're not being told the entire truth. I agree with you that 12 months worth of data isn't enough to make any real decision. We could have had good years, bad years. This particular data could have been on a good year. But also from the practical point of view, there's no joined up thinking, and we see that all the time with this government. They're closing Port Talbot, but there's nothing to replace it, and that's the problem. And I think with Rishi, he's too quick to panic and do something that makes it look like he's actually being proactive, when realistically he's making it worse.
Well, listen, we've got about 30 seconds for you, so go for Adrian Gell. 30 seconds, super fast.
Hi, Nana, I'll be as quick as I can. Yeah, OK, is net zero built on lies? It's all about massaging figures, isn't it, really? And it's also the difference between fibs and lies. You know, how serious is a lie? How serious is a fib? Is a fib that lot? An awful lot better. And, you know, is really 12 months' worth of figures worth looking at? You need to go back an awful lot further than that to produce some decent figures on it.
Exactly.
And to be perfectly honest, any government in power is going to massage the figures to suit themselves, which is what both parties are doing at the moment.
Well, listen, I've got to go, Adrian. I've got to go. But I think you're super. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Adrian Gell. Thank you so much, Julie in Bedford, Gareth Wynne-Jones, and also Lee. Right, well, it's time now for Supplement Sunday. This is the part of the show where I test my panel on some of the other stories that have hit the headlines. So joining me, Christine Hamilton and also Danny Kelly. Who wants to go first? I'm going to start with The Telegraph. I'll do mine after. Christine Hamilton, what's your story?
Right, well, mine comes from the Mail on Sunday. This is unbelievable. If you're tall and you've got big feet, you cannot drive one of the new eco-friendly ambulances. A whole pile of these ambulances have been bought by the NHS to meet their green targets across the country. But lo and behold, if you've got size feet and above, you can't use them because your toe-cap boots are too big to move across
size
the pedals.
12, you didn't say the size.
Did I not say size 12?
You said size feet.
Oh, size feet. OK, size 12 and above. Well, lots of chaps.
Danny Kelly.
I haven't finished.
No,
well, they're having to bin all these ambulances.
Danny.
Another stupid decision by the NHS.
Want to live to 100? Well, apparently, well, you're closer to it than Nana and I.
Oh, get on with it.
Basically, the important thing about when you get old is to remain in a social group, OK? Quit smoking, all of that sort of stuff, but remain social.
And I literally don't have time for my one, but I can tell you now, it's a piece that I wrote in the Mail on Sunday about the wokery that's happening with that wonderful show, The Apprentice. You need a backstory to get any investment by the looks of things. But yes, well, listen, on today's show, I've been asking, are we ready for war? And according to my Twitter poll, 13.8% of you say yes and 86.2% of you say no. Thank you so much to my panel, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, and also broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly. And thank you again to you at home for your company. I look forward to seeing you next week, Saturday, 3 o'clock, same time, same place. I'll leave you with the weather. Have a fabulous week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha very much in charge of our weather over the next couple of days, bringing some very heavy rain and some strong winds too. It'll slowly be moving its way towards us through Sunday evening, bringing that heaviest rain to those western coasts and the strongest winds through the early hours of Monday morning. That rain continues to spread its way north and eastwards later through Sunday, and that's when we see those winds really starting to pick up. Gusts widely 60 to 70 miles an hour along those western coasts, perhaps 80 to 90 across northern parts of Scotland through the early hours of Monday. A milder night than we've seen over recent weeks, perhaps 6 or 7 degrees quite widely, maybe 8 or 9 across the very far southeast, but it's a very windy start to the day on Monday. Winds will gradually start to ease through the morning, but it still will be staying very blustery through much of Monday itself. Showers widely pushing in from the west, these turning particularly heavy at times, perhaps even the odd flake of snow across the high ground of Scotland. There will be some sunshine, particularly further south and further east, and temperatures here maybe 10 or 11 degrees, but with those strong blustery winds, that'll take the edge off those temperatures. Tuesday will start a little bit drier, perhaps some sunshine across those eastern areas through the morning, but the next system quite quickly pushes in from the west. Rain spreading its way north and eastwards, turning heaviest along those western coasts and bringing with it some strong winds too. A little brighter on Wednesday, but further wet and windy weather is on its way later in the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right.